Chapter 1522. How much longer until midnight? Bai Shuang had asked this question countless times, and Xiao Qing, the commander of the 1st Battalion of the Guard Regiment, had answered it countless times. Finally, when there were less than 3 minutes left, his voice was filled with excitement as he said, "General, there are still 3 minutes left." Good. Pass down the order. All troops, get ready to charge." Turning his head to look at the dense crowd behind him, the corners of Bai Shuang's mouth trembled as he spoke. Because of the snow, more than 30,000 people were changed from cavalry to infantry, which made them unable to take advantage of their speed. They would have to rely on their feet to charge, but he believed that even so, victory would definitely belong to them, because they had a strong and firm belief. On the city wall of Turkmenistan, the 5,000 five-star army soldiers began to slowly unfreeze from their frozen state. One by one, the soldiers slowly raised their heads, revealing a determined gaze. After waiting for more than 2 hours, the bone-chilling wind had already penetrated their clothes and entered their bodies. Many people had already suffered from slight frostbite, but everyone was in a good state of mind. Perhaps this was what it meant when there was a great reward. When the time was almost up with Commander Zhuang Cheng taking the lead, everyone slowly raised their heads. Then the soldiers of the assault team took out their throwing hooks and threw them up the city wall. With the sound of the wind at night, no one even cared about the sound of the triangular anchor stuck on the city wall. Then the assault team members climbed up one by one like agile monkeys and went straight to the almost undefended city wall of Turkmenistan. It was incorrect to say that there was no defense. Although Janibek Khan didn't want people to know that he was in the city, he still arranged for patrols on the city wall. But because it was midnight and it was freezing outside, no one thought that someone would attack the city at this time. The patrols on the city wall had already huddled up in a shelter from the wind and were sitting together to warm each other. The people on duty at this time weren't very lucky and were full of complaints. They were lazy and didn't need to worry about the officers coming to check on them. After all, in this kind of weather, who wouldn't want to stay in their warm beds and not come out? The direct result of this was that after the commandos ascended the tower, no one could stop them. It was only until a small group of 30 people took advantage of the darkness to sneak down the stairs that they discovered a group of 50 Kazakh soldiers. They were huddled together. Some were sleeping, some were talking, and some were trying to distract themselves. 30 against 50. If it was a direct confrontation, it was obvious that the side with fewer people would be at a disadvantage. But at this time, the side with more people was completely unprepared, and the side with fewer people were all fierce assault team members. The result would be the right one. After seeing this formation, the assault squad leader named Bai Shuang Cheng made a few hand gestures in the dark. Immediately, 20 of his squad members split up to flank the enemy from the left and right. Another 10 squad members saw an opportune moment and sprinted towards the passageway leading to the bottom of the city tower like leopards. The sudden movement quickly attracted the attention of a few soldiers who were chatting, but they didn't have the chance to shout anything. A black shadow suddenly appeared in front of them, and the sharp blade slashed across their throats. One after another, the Kazakh soldiers didn't even have the chance to shout before they felt the strength in their bodies being sucked out. Then, the figure swayed and fell to the ground with a plop. After that, more and more commandos appeared. This patrol team of 50 people either watched with their eyes wide open as they were killed by Dao foam or lost consciousness while still in their dreams. From the beginning to the end, no more than 2 minutes had passed, and there was no other movement. Phew! After inspecting the corpses of the enemy soldiers, he discovered that all of them were dead. After confirming that there were no hidden dangers, the assault team leader breathed a long sigh of relief. Then he listened to the movements downstairs and discovered the sounds of wild cats. He knew that the people downstairs had also succeeded. Thinking about it, the defense of the most dangerous city wall was already so lax. There was no need to talk about the situation downstairs. Whether or not there was anyone watching was another matter. Being able to succeed was a matter of course. Everything went smoothly as planned. The assault team leader responded to the sounds of the wild cats downstairs, telling them to open the city gates and prepare to welcome the army at any time. He even took out a match from his bosom and lit up a torch that he had prepared beforehand. In the cold night, the sudden appearance of a fire and warmth made people unable to help but feel a sense of trust. However, the assault team leader didn't intend to use this opportunity to warm himself up. He lit up the torch to signal to Zhuang Qing below. After seeing that everything was in place, he raised the torch up high. In the darkness, the light was so clear and eye-catching. The assault team has succeeded. All soldiers, listen to my orders. Attack! Zhuang Qing had been searching and waiting this entire time. When he saw the signal, Zhuang Qing couldn't hold himself back and stood out from the cold snow. Then, more soldiers in white cloaks stood up beside him. As if to cooperate with them, the city gate several dozen steps away slowly opened from the inside. In the silent night, the creaking sounds of the city gate opening were especially sharp. What's going on? Why did the city gate open? Who gave the order? This kind of movement finally attracted angry curses and reprimands. Through his studies, Zhuang Qing, who understood the language of the Kazakh Khanate, knew that his plan had been discovered. He had to hurry up. He didn't care about hiding his identity and shouted, "All soldiers, follow this commander and attack! Kill the enemy and gain merit! Kill the enemy and gain merit!" This kind of shout instantly attracted more voices of agreement. Then the 5,000 soldiers charged forward with high fighting spirit. Due to the cold weather, some of the warriors even fell to the ground while running. That was because their bodies were stiff. However, when they got up and moved their bodies and found that there wasn't much of a problem, they continued to shout and charge. Behind them, when the torches on the city gate were lit, Commander Bai Shuang had led the main force of the foreign army to charge. In comparison, they were afraid of being discovered by the enemy, so they were further away. They also didn't have the help of war horses, so they had to rely on their feet. However, no matter what the conditions were, they had to quickly enter the city. Otherwise, the pressure on the 5,000 vanguard soldiers would increase. No one knew how many of these 5,000 warriors were still able to fight in such bad weather. First, there was the sound of the city gate opening, followed by the sounds of fighting and killing. When the other city guards heard this, they instantly understood what had happened. More and more people began to gather at the city gate. They were also shocked at how the enemy had managed to sneak in and open the city gate in such cold weather. However, no matter what should have happened had already happened. Now, the only thing they had to do was to chase the invaders out. Otherwise, they would all die here. The movement at the city gate quickly spread to Jainurbek Khan's ears. This Kazakh Khan suddenly jumped up from his bed and shouted, "How is this possible? In such heavy snow, war horses can't be used at all. In such cold weather, they have traveled so far. Which army can withstand such cold weather? Also, how did they know that this Khan was in the city? There must be a traitor. Yes, there must be a traitor." Of course, there was a traitor. However, it wasn't someone in the city like Jainurbek Khan thought. It was Wanyan Hong from the Wanyan family, whom he had been suppressing. At this time, it was clearly not wise to be tangled up in this matter. After Jainurbek Khan vented his dissatisfaction by shouting, he also thought of this problem. He immediately ordered, "Send out all the troops in the city. Send them out and chase the enemy out of the city gate. There shouldn't be too many of them. Otherwise, our scouts would have discovered them. As long as we chase them out of the city, they won't be able to do anything to us with the city gate as cover. In such cold weather, they will retreat without attacking. Tell these words to the generals. If they want to survive, they must use all their strength to kill the enemy." Jainurbek Khan's analysis was reasonable. When his words reached the ears of the generals, they also deeply agreed with him. Then, nearly 20,000 troops in the city were mobilized and pressed against the east gate that had been opened. At this moment, there was an intense battle going on at the east gate. It was only because Zhuangqing and the others were fast enough that they managed to enter the city before the city gates were forcefully closed. However, in order to defend the city gate, they paid the price. Only 2 of the 30 commandos were left, and both of them were slightly injured. The enemy is not weak. We must not be careless. Seeing that the commandos were almost completely wiped out in a short period of time, Zhuangqing felt immense pressure. When he turned around to look at his soldiers, most of them had pale faces and were trembling all over. He knew that the long period of hiding had greatly affected their combat strength. With their current strength, if the enemy counterattacked too fiercely, it was hard to say if they could wait until the main force arrived. Since they had already launched the attack, there was no reason to give up halfway. Zhuangqing gritted his teeth and said to the soldiers who were still trembling because of the cold, "Don't be afraid, everyone. Try to move your limbs as much as possible. There will be a great battle soon. We must hold on until the main force arrives. When that time comes, everyone will be heroes. Our families will also benefit from our efforts today." Chapter 15:23. For our families fight. When the soldiers heard these words of encouragement, many of their faces were filled with determination. They took the opportunity to move their bodies, stretching their arms and kicking their legs, hoping to force the cold out of their bodies and regain their mobility. The sound of footsteps became more and more frequent. In the dark night, the number of black shadows in front of them also gradually increased. Zhuangqing led the soldiers to see all of this. He felt that the reaction of the Kazakh soldiers was indeed fast. They were worthy of being the elites by Janibek Khan's side. However, at the same time, they could not hold the weapons in their hands tightly. They were prepared to fight to the death. Archers, get ready. Fire! When he felt that the enemy was less than 70 steps away from them, Zhuangqing shouted loudly. The archers who had just gathered together fired a round of arrows. They could clearly feel that many of the black shadows in the distance were shot down. Archers, fire! After the initial panic, the black shadows on the opposite side quickly reacted. Then the same military order was given. Then the sky was covered with arrows, and they fell on the vanguard, led by Zhuangqing. Although they were prepared, and some of the soldiers took out their shields, facing the dense rain of arrows, many of them were still hit. In a short period of time, hundreds of soldiers were killed by the arrows. Kill! When the distance was close, the arrows were obviously not suitable. The Kazakh general ordered the soldiers to charge. In this regard, Zhuangqing was unwilling to pass on his responsibility. Although the number of soldiers he brought was small, he still shouted the slogan to charge and kill. The confrontation between the two armies was like this. Putting aside the fact that the brave would win in a narrow path, when faced with the enemy's attack, if one side retreated out of fear, the morale of the soldiers would plummet, and they would be defeated like a mountain. Shouts of killing continuously sounded, regardless of whether they were willing or not. In the end, the soldiers of both sides fought together in front of the east gate. When the weapons collided with each other, the black shadows fell to the ground one after another, and blood splattered everywhere. In such a chaotic situation, the so-called martial prowess was no longer important. The battle was to see which side's formation was more solid, whose killing intent was more ruthless, whose willpower was more firm. Every swing of the saber, sword, or spear could be the last action of their lives. No one would be careless, and no one dared to be careless. It was as if two ferocious beasts had collided. Under the impact, they were all riddled with wounds and suffered heavy casualties. The number of casualties was almost 1-to-1, and the number of people in Zhuangqing's team was greatly reduced. There was nothing the commander could do about it. The only thing he could do was to keep looking outside the city to see where Commander Bai Shuang was leading the army. Speaking of which, the army was composed of all non-humankind young men. They came from different places, had different beliefs and different habits. Gathering these people together was already a problem. Wanting to tie them together into a rope and organize them into a powerful fighting force was even more difficult. Even though Commander Bai Shuang had put in a lot of effort for this and had basically eliminated the barriers between the different races, their combat strength was still far inferior to the veteran New Third Army and other veteran armies. Compared to the world's first cavalry army, the gap between them was unimaginably huge. Many times, the Yi army would win because they had more people and momentum. They would win because Commander Bai Shuang's command was correct. Once it was a one-on-one battle, their weak side would be exposed, just like what was happening right now. After a quarter of an hour of battle, Zhuang Qing could feel that there were more casualties on his side. Apart from the fact that they were lying in the cold snow and couldn't use their full strength, it was also because their fighting ability and numbers were inferior. It was also thanks to the East City Gate's terrain that they couldn't place more troops at the same time. Otherwise, it would be difficult for them to hold on for more than a minute. Press on with the reserves. No matter what, we can't abandon the city gate, even if we have to fight to the last man, Zhuang Qing said with a serious expression. When he said this, he was already prepared to sacrifice himself. He absolutely could not allow the East Gate to be snatched back by the enemy. If that happened, their strategic intentions would be exposed, and it would be very difficult to deal with Janel Bek Khan, who had the city wall to rely on. This was the time for the Yi army to amaze the world. In the cold weather, all the 5-star army were resting, but only the Yi army took the initiative to attack. If they could achieve a great victory, their influence would undoubtedly be even more shocking. The name of the Yi army would also resound throughout the 5-star army. At that time, who would dare to look down on them? In order to kill the enemy and gain merit for the Yi army, Zhuang Chang was willing to give up his life. Unless he died, he would never let the enemy regain control of the gate. Quick, faster. Those who can run, run first. Don't worry about the formation. Bai Shuang led more than 30,000 soldiers and ran over from 5 miles away. At this time, even the soldiers with good stamina were panting. If he were to run on flat ground, the distance of only 5 miles was nothing to him. He would be able to rush over with his army in less than a quarter of an hour. Moreover, he would have the ability to join the battle immediately. However, in the heavy snow, it was a different story. The snow was knee-high, and every step was very difficult. Many times, when one stepped on an empty space while flying at a high speed, it was possible for one to sink into the ground. Even if they stepped on the ground, they would often pull out one leg and the other leg would sink into the snow. In such an environment, it was impossible to make use of the advantage of speed. Therefore, after walking for a quarter of an hour, they didn't even cover half of the distance of 5 miles. If they continued like this, it was impossible to reach the gate in time. This would increase the pressure on Commander Zhuang Cheng. It was even possible that he would abandon the gate. In a moment of desperation, Bai Shuang saw too high of the 301st Division. He was leading hundreds of soldiers to clear the path for everyone, and he was even stopping to wait for the main force of the army. He had an idea and gave the order to attack alone without the need for a group. The first 10,000 people to reach the gate will be rewarded with military merit. Once Bai Shuang gave the order, Tu Hai was only stunned for a moment before he left the formation of the army and began to speed up. Behind him, there were hundreds of people following closely. Even further away, there were hundreds and thousands of people who also began to speed up, trying their best to run forward. The speed of the army finally increased, and Bai Shuang couldn't help but sigh in relief. Now, it was up to Zhuang Cheng and the others to see how long they could hold on. This time, they couldn't lose no matter what. This was a good opportunity for the Yi army to make a name for themselves. For this reason, Bai Shuang didn't ask for help from the Cold Front 4th Division on the Eastern Front. Otherwise, with an army with firearms, they wouldn't care about the city walls of Turkmenistan. Bai Shuang was a little nervous, but Zhuang Cheng at the East Gate had already forgotten what nervousness was. when he saw wave after wave of soldiers charging up and falling down, and when the smell of blood reached his nose, he had already disregarded life and death. At this moment, there was only the enemy in his eyes. There was only killing the enemy. Perhaps it was because the 5-star army's counterattack wasn't intense, but the Kazakh soldiers' morale was greatly boosted. After seeing that there weren't many enemies, their courage was boosted, and they charged even more fiercely. Furthermore, they had all crawled out of their warm beds and had never experienced frostbite before, so they could unleash their full strength. In comparison, the 5-star army's side seemed to be at a disadvantage. After another 15 minutes, less than 800 of the 5,000 vanguard soldiers were left. This was the last of Zhuang Cheng's strength. Seeing so many of their comrades die in front of them, the remaining 800 people's eyes were red, and the veins on their hands holding their swords were popping out, reflecting their anger. Even if they joined the 5-star army, even if they joined a different army, it was tantamount to tying their fates together. Without a military order, they could only advance and not retreat. This was an iron law. If anyone dared to disobey, not only would they be beheaded, even their family would be implicated. Their family would have to bear the name of a deserter and live a difficult life. Whether it was for their own dignity or for their family, these 800 people couldn't retreat. Either they killed the enemies charging at them, or they were killed by the enemies. There was no third way. Come, fight for yourself, fight for your family. Zhuang Cheng pulled out his sword and said with a murderous look on his face, "Fight, fight for our family." The 800 warriors all shouted in unison and took out their weapons. Under Zhuang Cheng's lead, they charged at the charging Kazakh soldiers. With Zhuang Cheng taking the lead, no one was able to block his sharp saber. Several Kazakh soldiers were cut down and fell to the ground. This scene greatly stimulated the other soldiers, causing their morale to suddenly soar in a short period of time. They forced the Kazakh soldiers to retreat by a distance of nearly 10 feet. As the saying goes, a soldier is strong, while a general is strong. Zhuang Cheng's bravery set an example for the other soldiers, allowing them to display their own potential and make a temporary turnaround. The Kazakh soldiers didn't expect this result. When many of the Kiliarchs saw that the 5-star army was at the end of their rope, they couldn't help but have a fearful expression. As the saying goes, the unreasonable are afraid of the reckless, and the reckless are afraid of those who don't care about their lives. When facing enemies who didn't care about their lives, the fear in their bones would unconsciously jump out. Chapter 1524. There is a large number of 5-star army outside the city. They are getting closer and closer. After both sides stopped fighting for a short moment, a shout suddenly sounded from the city gate tower that had already been recaptured. When this shout entered the ears of the Kiliarchs, they immediately reacted. "Kill them! We cannot allow them to join up with the reinforcements. Immediately recapture the city gate. When the time comes, we will have the advantage of the city wall and will be able to defend the city. Otherwise, all of us will be killed by the 5-star army." A Kazakh Chiliarch loudly shouted, revealing everyone's situation. Under this kind of shout, the Kazakh soldiers who originally wanted to avoid the brunt of the attack were unable to retreat. If they didn't kill all of the 5-star army in front of them, then the next one to die would be them. This was an extremely easy decision to make. If it wasn't you who died, then it was me who died. Of course, everyone would choose to die for their opponent. Under the loud shouts, the Kazakh soldiers suddenly reacted even more fiercely than before. At one point, the 800 warriors, led by Zhuang Cheng, suffered disastrous casualties. In a single round, more than 300 corpses were thrown down. At the same time, they also retreated more than 6 zhang. The eastern city gate was only 5 zhang behind them. If they retreated a bit more, then they might be blasted out of the city gate. If the city gate was closed, then even if they survived, what meaning would there be? Stomping his foot and gritting his teeth, Zhuang Cheng's face revealed a resolute expression as he loudly shouted, "Warriors, behind us is the city gate. We already have no way to retreat. Now, let us spill the last drop of blood in our bodies and stake it all against the enemy." Stake it all. There were less than 500 people left, and there was no longer any fear on their faces. Under the premise that they already knew the result, they were instead afraid that they would leave. Right now, they were only thinking about how many enemies they could kill before they died. Killing one was enough. Killing two was a profit. Even if a warrior didn't go to school, they would still calculate the gains and losses. Zhuangqing and the others began to unleash the last of their strength. Under the full-force counterattack of nearly 500 men, under Zhuangqing's leadership, they didn't retreat a single step. Only when there were less than 100 men left, and almost all of them were injured, did the Kazakh soldiers on the city gate tower begin to shout and release arrows from above their heads. Needless to say, the reinforcements from the 5-star army had arrived. When they heard this voice, Zhuangqing and the others seemed to be filled with energy in an instant. The 100 of them unleashed their last bit of potential. One by one, they brandished their swords and charged towards the endless stream of Kazakh soldiers. There were at least 3,000 Kazakh soldiers on the other side, and with the momentum of 100 charging soldiers, they were like a small boat in the middle of a huge wave, drifting unsteadily, as if there was a possibility of capsizing at any time. But even so, none of the warriors retreated. Instead, they stood there firmly like stone statues, not moving an inch. Zhuangqing already had 4 knife wounds, 2 gunshot wounds, and 1 sword wound. At this time, his eyes were already in a trance, and because of his exhaustion and excessive blood loss, he couldn't see clearly what was in front of him. But under his instincts, he continued to brandish his sword, trying to kill as many enemies as possible. "Regiment commander, you should step back. As long as you are still here, our guard regiment may be rebuilt." One of the guards of the EE army took the initiative to come to Zhuangqing's side. Then, with a light push, he pushed Zhuangqing to the back from the side. The soldier, who already had 2 knife wounds on his body, replaced Zhuangqing's position. He stood there, entangled with the 3 Kazakh soldiers. Even a good tiger couldn't withstand a pack of wolves. Not to mention, this soldier was already an arrow at the end of its flight. If not for his conviction supporting him, he would have already fallen to the ground. 1 against 3, and with his own injuries he only managed to slash out twice. He didn't even manage to injure any of the enemies. Then he felt a huge force colliding with the blade in his hand. Finally, the long blade was knocked away. His entire body was also sent flying after being hit by the blade. The fallen soldier fell beside Zhuangqing. Looking at the soldier who had just saved him, Zhuangqing, who had recovered some of his vision, had tears in his eyes. "Shiguang, how are you? How are you?" Hearing the regiment commander's call, this soldier named Shiguang, who was originally from Laos, slowly opened his eyes. He forced a smile on his face and said, "Regiment commander, I persevered until the end. Can it be considered a meritorious service? Can my family bask in the glory?" "Yes, you have done a meritorious service. The military merits you have accumulated are enough to allow you to leave your registration and enter the Han dynasty. In the future, you will be a Han citizen. Your family will also be proud of you." Zhuangqing recognized the soldier. When he joined the army, he was very timid. However, after knowing that he could leave his registration and enter the Han dynasty, he seemed to have changed into a different person. He became extremely hardworking. In this battle, he had killed at least 3 enemies and had persevered until the end. Killing 3 people in addition to the military merits before, he indeed had the qualifications to leave his registration and enter the Han dynasty. Zhuangqing wasn't lying to him when he said those words. Instead, he just wanted him to leave safely. "Is that so? That's great. I have a younger brother who can help me enter the Han dynasty. In the future, when I am no longer around, my family will have to rely on him. Is that okay, regiment commander?" Shiguang's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Perhaps that was the final radiance of a dying person. Yes, as the regiment commander, I promise you. Tears flowed from Zhuang Cheng's eyes. At this moment, Zhuang Cheng was covered in tears. Thank you, regiment commander. The soldier named Shi Guang finally smiled and closed his eyes. However, this closure would become permanent. Looking at the dead warrior who had just saved him lying in his arms, Zhuang Cheng felt a surge of anger. He didn't know where it got the strength, but he stood up again. He pulled out his sword and slashed at the Kazakh soldiers who were charging at him. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes. He did not know how many slashes he had made, nor did he know if he had killed anyone. Zhuang Cheng only felt that the sky in front of him was dark. That was the sign of his physical strength being used to the extreme. Just when he was about to fall to the ground, a strong arm suddenly caught him. Following that, Division Commander Tu Hai's loud voice sounded in his ears. Regiment Commander Zhuang, you have completed the mission very well. Now you are very tired, you should go and rest. Men, is there any medical staff? Immediately save him. This was the voice that Zhuang Cheng heard before he fainted. He did not know whether it was an illusion or reality. After that, he completely closed his eyes. Division Commander Tu Hai had arrived. He brought more than 1,000 soldiers with him. Behind them, more and more soldiers from the other army were entering the city from the east gate. In the eyes of the Kazakh Kiliarchs, they knew that the situation was over, and everything was over. With no hope left, some of them simply abandoned their weapons and knelt on the ground to surrender. There were also some who directly ran towards the other city gates. They did not want to surrender to the 5-star army, so they could only risk charging into the harsh environment where snow was everywhere in order to survive. Janelbek Khan did not escape. He had no place to escape. He also did not think that the 5-star army could really enter the city. Just a moment ago, someone had reported that the 5-star army could be driven out of the city. However, in just a short while, the 5-star army actually entered the city. With such a huge contrast, Janelbek Khan didn't even have time to prepare before he heard even worse news. The place where he lived, which used to be the Kazakh Imperial Palace, was surrounded by the 5-star army. With a plop, Janelbek Khan fell to the ground. He knew that from today onwards, there would no longer be a Khan behind his name. He would become a prisoner. Perhaps he would be killed. Perhaps he would live in a dungeon forever. A sharp scimitar was unknowingly in his hand. Janelbek Khan wanted to end his life. He did not want to be a prisoner. He did not want to be treated like a prisoner. However, when the scimitar was placed on his neck several times, he finally put it down powerlessly. He did not have the courage to do so. It was also at this time that Janelbek Khan realized that he was a coward. He did not even have the courage to die. At this time he was in tears. He hated himself for being a coward. Even when countless soldiers from the 5-star army rushed in and dragged him away, his tears still didn't stop. The EE army actually managed to capture the city of Gelkistan when it was snowing heavily and captured the Kazakh Khan Janelbek. When the news spread, Amur, who was in Herat city, heard it and was shocked. He knew very well how difficult it was to launch an attack in the snow. The cold weather was likely to reduce the number of soldiers by a quarter or more. Not to mention the fact that they had to attack the city in such weather. The news showed that the 5-star army did not use any firearms to capture Turkmenistan city. Doesn't this mean that even in a battle of cold weapons, the 5-star army is quite strong? At this moment, Amur felt that he could not see any hope. Not only did Amur have such thoughts, everyone in the royal city was shocked when they heard the news. Some of the capitulators had their own thoughts. They firmly believed that the 5-star army was invincible and decided to surrender. As for those who supported the war, some of them were unconsciously shaken. Even if they didn't think for themselves, they still had to think for their families. If they still insisted on going to war and the 5-star army really defeated them and took over the royal city as the pro-war faction, where would they go from here? This kind of thinking also affected great General Manjulata. Originally, it was just some influential people who sent him messages. Their words were full of the idea of surrender. What 5-star army was invincible was everywhere. But now, even some of the generals under his command began to waver. This made him deeply distressed. He suddenly became worried about this war that he was originally confident in. When he took the initiative to find Amor and told him about his confusion and the situation in the army, he finally got some good news. That is, after the 5-star army went to the rear, there was another force called the Great Ming Dynasty that also attacked the rear of the 5-star army. The damage caused was even greater. Chapter 1525. The chaos in the rear of the 5-star army meant that the Timur Empire's opportunity had arrived. According to Khan Amur's plan, as long as they could withstand the first wave of attacks from the 5-star army, the other side would be forced to retreat and deal with their internal problems first. Once that happened, they would have a chance to catch their breath. Although placing the hope of survival on someone else wasn't a smart move, it wasn't a smart move. But at this moment, without a better choice, Mendu La too could only think like this. The king of the 3 provinces was Zhu Huiqiu. Originally, he had a good relationship with Bangla, and they had worked together to deal with Shiping King Mu's family. Now that they were working together to deal with the 5-star army, it wasn't surprising. Even so, when the telegram reached the ears of Yang Qindong, who was waiting for the beginning of spring in the snow, it still aroused his anger. He already knew that Zhu Huiqiu was a two-faced person and sent troops to guard against him. But after Bangla invaded Burma, Yang Qindong moved the troops to deal with the problem there. He didn't expect Zhu Huiqiu to make a move at this time. It had to be said that Zhu Huiqiu grasped the opportunity very well. At least he caught the 5-star army off guard. Send a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and tell them to put pressure on the southern Ming Empire. Zhu Huiqiu is the king of the 3 provinces. Now that he suddenly sent troops, they have the right to control it. Also, send a telegram to the 1st Division of the Cold Front to stop training new recruits and go to Yunnan province. We want to show some people how powerful we are. Yang Qindong said with a deep expression. Hearing that the 1st Division of the Cold Front was mobilized, Beta Persei's eyes flashed with surprise. Even if they were all part of the Cold Front, there were differences in strength. For example, the 1st Division of the Cold Front was the most elite of the Cold Front. If entering the Cold Front was a very difficult thing, then entering the 1st Division of the Cold Front was even more difficult. Their test was second only to the Black Cavalry. Because of this, they shouldered the task of training the new Cold Front. Everyone was an instructor and everyone was the backbone. Even an ordinary soldier could calmly become an outstanding squad leader. This was simply a teaching brigade. One could imagine how powerful such an army would be. Coupled with the fact that they were fully equipped with firearms, their combat prowess was astonishing enough to deter any opponent. Now that the young master had sent this army, it was obvious that he hated Zhu Huiqiu. The telegram was transmitted to the headquarters of the army in Crimson City. After receiving the telegram, Lung Song immediately ordered someone to summon the commander of the 1st Division, Ting Shan. In less than half an hour, Ting Shan, who was riding an electric motorcycle, appeared at the headquarters. It had been some time since the engine was successfully developed, and it had been used in many fields. Among them, there were many battery-powered vehicles. When this thing was first born, it truly frightened many people, especially when they saw that this thing did not require manpower to move, and it was not slow at all. Everyone was completely convinced by science. This was especially true for those scholars who had been lured from northern Ming and southern Ming to Crimson City through various channels. They didn't dare to spout nonsense and pick on the flaws in science. On the contrary, many people began to change their subject. They put aside the 4 books and 5 classics and asked about applying to Yangtze Academy. As the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, Ting Shan was definitely one of the oldest people following Yang Qindong. Even though he was only a major general and a division commander, he was still a commander. However, even if he was given the position of commander of a group army, he would not be able to exchange for this position. He was the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, and his existence was equivalent to the leader of a teaching brigade. At least 60% of the soldiers of the Cold Front were indirectly or directly related to him. They were either his students or his students' students. A person with this kind of experience naturally had to own a battery-powered vehicle. When he rode past in a flashy manner, followed by a group of panting guards who were chasing after him on bicycles, there was no need to mention the smugness on his face. Tung Shan came to the office of the deputy commander of the army headquarters, Lung Song. After he knocked on the door and entered, he saluted and sat on the guest chair in the office. He poured himself a cup of hot tea and asked with a smile, "Lung Song, do you have any instructions? Is there a tough battle that you want our division to fight?" When Tung Shan asked this question, he still spoke in a joking tone. He knew very well that on the surface he was a division commander, but in reality he was the leader of the teaching brigade of the Cold Front. From time to time, he would also be the leader of the training brigade of the New Corps and even the recruit division. There were too few times when he would be needed on the battlefield. Even though he also heard that Myanmar was not peaceful right now, and that Vietnam was also caught in the whirlpool of war, he still did not think that he would be needed. This sentence was more of a joke than anything else. What he did not expect was that Lung Song, who heard this sentence, had a shocked look on his face. "What? You already know about it? What do you mean? What do you mean?" At this moment, Ting Shan suddenly stood up. He felt that he seemed to be right. Could it be that he was really needed in the future? If that was the case, it could not be better. At this moment, he was somewhat unable to suppress his excitement. When Lung Song saw Ting Shan's reaction, he knew that he was overthinking. Ting Shan did not know anything at all. He should have just said it casually. When he thought about how the 6th young master's telegram had been sent directly to him, he laughed and said, "You're in luck, kid. The 6th young master has appointed the 1st Division of the Cold Front. This time, you can show your face properly." When he heard that it was Yang Chindong who had personally appointed the 1st Division of the Cold Front, Ting Shan was so excited that he did not know what to say. Was there finally a place for him to show his skills? When he thought about how he had been placed in the rear for so many years, he had almost forgotten what war was all about. Now that he could finally fight again and display his military prowess, tears flowed uncontrollably from the corners of his eyes. When he saw Tung Shan crying, Lung Song walked out from behind his desk and patted him on the shoulder. "I can understand how you feel. Facts have also proven that the 6th young master has never forgotten about you. Isn't this a chance for you to show off? How about this? The training work will be left to your teaching group. You can lead the other groups. When you go back, make the best use of your time and try to get to the front line as soon as possible." Speaking of which, the 3 provincial kings are very arrogant now. It's time to teach them how to behave. When he heard that the opponent was the 3 provincial kings, Ting Shan wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes and laughed. "Lung too, don't worry. This time, watch how the 1st Division of the Cold Front takes care of him. I guarantee that he will be beaten until his parents can't recognize him." Ha ha ha. If it was anyone else who said this, even if it was another division of the Cold Front, Lung Song would not take it seriously. However, when it came from Ting Shan, it was completely different. The 1st Division of the Cold Front wasn't just a simple teaching mission. They were also responsible for ensuring the safety of the Crimson Nest City. In order to better complete the mission, they were good at things like infiltration, assassination, decapitation, reconnaissance, and even naval and air forces. If there was a word to describe them, it would be the special forces of the Cold Front. When an army of tens of thousands of people suddenly appeared on the battlefield and faced people who had only undergone simple training and were holding outdated swords and spears, it would be a bit of a bully. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they would beat Zhu Huihua until his parents could not recognize him. "Okay, I believe you. However, don't forget that the training mission cannot be abandoned. If one teaching group is not enough, you can tell me, and I will transfer more people for you." Hearing these confident words, Lung Song knew that this battle was in the bag. The only difference was how big the scale of the battle would be. It's enough. One teaching group is enough. Usually we only arrange for one regiment to train new recruits. The other regiments are doing all kinds of training. Tang Shan shook his head, indicating that even if the division's main force left, the work left behind would not be slack at all. Ting Shan left at a faster speed than when he came. When he rode the electric scooter back to the division headquarters of the 1st Division of the Cold Front, apart from the teaching group, the other 4 regimental commanders entered the meeting room. When everyone found out that the 1st Division of the Cold Front finally did not have to stay at home and could go out to fight, everyone was extremely excited. If it were not for Tung Shan's constant reminders and warnings, even the table would have been smashed. After a while, everyone finally calmed down. Then the regimental commander of the 1st Regiment, Chung Hu, asked in an excited tone, "Sir, when can we set off?" "That's right. All these years, we've been watching our brothers' troops perform meritorious deeds at the front lines while we're the only ones left behind. We can't stand it anymore. If we can set off, the sooner the better." The 2nd Regiment commander, Xiao Shan, also shouted to express his attitude. Seeing how anxious the regimental commanders were, Teng Shan nodded. "Have you heard about the incident with Commander Bai Shuang of the Yi Army?" "Sir, are you talking about the snowstorm?" "Of course, I've heard about it. Yang Bao has recorded it. The Yi Army is really good. Under the heavy snow, other people would find it cold to walk around, but he insisted on it. He actually took the initiative to attack and even achieved a complete victory, as expected of the 6th Young Master's favorite student." The 3rd Regiment commander, Fang Hao, said with an envious and admiring tone. After the 1st Regiment commander and the 2nd Regiment commander heard this, they kept nodding their heads. Obviously, they had the same view on this matter. Only the 4th Regiment commander, Chen Zaiqiang, nodded his head first. Then his eyes suddenly widened as he said, "Wait, does Sir mean that we should also attack in the snowstorm like the Yi Army?" Chapter 1526. Ting Shan nodded proudly as he looked at Commander Chen Zaiqiang with admiration. "Yes, that's what I was thinking. However, due to the weather, Yunnan province isn't that cold and there isn't any snow. In fact, it's quite warm right now. Therefore, it's not right to attack in a snowy day, but attacking in winter isn't wrong." "Okay, then let's attack now." The 4 commanders nodded in agreement. To them, it didn't matter what season they attacked in. The most important thing was to attack quickly. They couldn't wait to show off their skills on the battlefield. They also wanted to prove to the other Lung vanguard that 1st Commander Lung wasn't just good at training new recruits. His fighting ability was unparalleled. Everyone reached an agreement, and in the following time, they discussed the battle plan. Since 1st Commander Lung was going to leave the mountain, the bigger the commotion, the better. The more firearms and equipment they brought, the better. Based on the fact that their teacher was Tung Shan, there shouldn't be any problem. This senior was someone who had trained with a few of the Yang family's guards. With this layer of relationship, Yang Wu happened to be in charge of the distribution of firearms in Crimson City. Wouldn't it be easy for him to obtain more bullets? Soon, the news that 1st Commander Lung was going to Yunnan province spread to the upper echelons. A telegram was quickly sent out from an inconspicuous building. In front of Zhu Huiyun's residence, the young man Mo Gui, who had appeared once before, delivered the telegram to him. "Respected King, this time, the one coming to cause trouble for you is the 1st Commander Lung, the trump card of the 5-star army." After showing the contents of the telegram to Zhu Huiyun, Mo Gui took a few steps back and shut his mouth. He was just a messenger and didn't have the authority to make decisions on many important matters. He only had reminders and suggestions. Even so, he would say what he should say, but he wouldn't say a word about what he shouldn't say. The tall Zhu Huiqin took a glance at the telegram. When he looked at Mo Gue, his eyes were full of curiosity. He still didn't know who the master behind Mo Gue was, but his intuition told him that the identity of the mysterious person behind Mo Gue wasn't low. He might even be a powerful person. Otherwise, how could he know the movements of the 5-star army so quickly? Out of curiosity, Zhu Huichan sometimes had the idea to capture Mo Gue and torture him to find out who his master was. But in the end, reason prevailed over impulse. Since the other party didn't want to meet him, it meant that it wasn't time yet. He still needed to continue waiting. Otherwise, even if he captured the person, he might not be able to get the answer he wanted. Mr. Mo, thank you for your information. However, wasn't it a little too simple? For example, how many people were there in Lin Yi's division? From which direction they will march to trouble us? If we don't know anything, it's not easy to deal with it, Zhu Huiqin said in a dissatisfied tone. Obviously, the other party was using him to go against Yang Qindong. Of course, this was also his intention. Seeing that the Vietnamese province was overflowing with wealth, who knew how many people under his rule would run to Yang Shi's territory as long as they had the chance. Moreover, once they ran, they would never come back. For this reason, he didn't know how many people he had killed. However, the warning was still very limited. More or less, people hated the rich. Zhu Huiqin had such an idea. He didn't find the reason from his own management. Instead, he unilaterally believed that the land in Yunnan province must be more fertile. Otherwise, how could so many people live there and never come back? After coveting it for a long time, Zhu Huiqin had long taken Vietnam province as his own. In his opinion, Yang Qindong's territory was already so big. He didn't care if Yunnan province was less, so it shouldn't be a problem for him to take the opportunity to snatch the territory into his own hands. Once he had this food-producing province as a foundation, he could support more troops and have stronger strength. At that time, when he faced other people, he would have more confidence. This was a typical example of insatiable greed. Zhu Huiqin didn't think about it. Why did other people have so many good things? So they must give it to you. He had also fought hard for it, all right? Of course, under greed, people would take the initiative to ignore something. What Zhu Huiqin ignored was the strength of the 5-star army. Perhaps it was because the 5-star army was either attacking the Mongolian army on the grassland near the first city or going to other areas to expand their territory. It had been a long time since they moved in Yunnan province, so Zhu Huiqin forgot that this neighbor was not to be trifled with. Or perhaps it was because after Burma was suddenly attacked by Bangla, it was a little difficult to deal with it. It made Zhu Huiqin think that the current 5-star army was a little weak. At this time, Mr. Mo Gue, who had given him money for free, appeared again. He also brought the opportunity to attack Yang Xie's territory and sent 1 million silver taels. For Zhu Huiqin, who had military power in 3 provinces and a military strength of as many as 500,000 people, the effect of 1 million silver taels was very limited. But this proved that the other party's attitude was not right, especially the other party's appearance was very clear about the internal situation of Yang Xie. This was what made Zhu Huiqin the most tempted. No matter how strong the opponent was, no matter how strong the fortress was, it was easy to be broken from the inside. Now that there was a spy, if he didn't take this opportunity to make a move, he was afraid that he would not have such an opportunity in the future. And he also heard that Bugnam of Gojozi and Yang Qindong was fighting with Timur and the other Khaganates at this time, and the progress was not smooth. Otherwise, Bangla would not have provoked the 5-star army and not been retaliated. With such evidence, Zhu Huiqin, who had always been greedy, finally made a move. He took the initiative to invade Yunnan province and smoothly robbed a lot of food stored in the granary, greatly alleviating the pressure on the army. After tasting the sweetness, Zhu Huiqin wanted to continue to go deeper into Yunnan province. Just by occupying a few border cities, he got so many benefits. If he built this province, how many times more would he get than now? And once he had enough food and money, he would dare to face the 5-star army head-on. As the saying goes, the ignorant are fearless. Zhu Huiqin, who had never truly angered Yang Qindong, naturally did not have a taste of the other party's strength, to the point that he did not put them in his heart. This was destined to bring him a strong enemy and even a fatal disaster, and since he was facing them, he had to give it his all. Zhu Huiqin also understood this principle, so while he was constantly mobilizing the army, he was also paying attention to the movements of the 5-star army. Fortunately, Mo Gui, this spy, helped him save a lot of effort. Now that he asked how many people the 5-star army had and what the specific battle plan was, he wanted to know the enemy as well as himself. Regarding this question, Mo Gui helplessly shook his head and said, "Honorable King, Leng Yi should have mobilized for regiments and the direct, subordinate battalions. In total, there are less than 10,000 people. As for their battle plan, to be honest, no one knows, not even Bugnam of Gojoseon. After the 5-star army received a mission, unless there is a detailed battle plan, they are allowed to do whatever they want on the battlefield." Do whatever they want. Zhu Huiqin looked at Mo Gui as if he was joking. Mo Gui knew what Zhu Huiqin was thinking from his expression. He shrugged and said, "Yes, they are allowed to do whatever they want. Believe me, King, this is Bugnam of Gojoseon's unique way of leading the army. This is also where his confidence lies." Speaking of this, Mo Gui had to admit that Yang Qindong completely delegated power to the army. Normal kings and kings wouldn't dare to do this. This was because mobilizing the army without orders could cause a mutiny at any time. Unless one had enough confidence in their own strength, who would dare to try this? One mistake and they would end up hurting themselves. However, Yang Qindong had done so. As a result, the generals under him had no more restraints. They were much freer and more flexible in doing things. This allowed them to better grasp the situation on the battlefield and win more battles by adapting to changes in time. Of course, outside of Yang Qindong, no one knew about the existence of the warehouse. This was Yang Qindong's true trump card. If someone really wanted to harm him, unless they could kill him in one blow, as long as he was given a chance to breathe, he would enter the great warehouse. When he came out, his appearance would change, and he would become a nightmare in the eyes of all his enemies. Mo Gui didn't know about this. He only admired Yang Qindong. However, thinking about the fact that they were enemies, he put this admiration away. Compared to Yang Qindong, who he couldn't see or touch, but only heard of, he needed to be more loyal to his current master, because without his current master, he might have died a long time ago. It was his master who gave him food to eat. Because of this, he would be loyal to him for the rest of his life. Even if he had to die because of this, he wouldn't frown. Hearing Mo Gui's answer, Zhu Huiyin was somewhat dissatisfied, but there was nothing he could do. This was the time for both sides to be united. He believed that Mo Gui was telling the truth. He wouldn't lie to him, because it wouldn't be good for either side. However, not knowing the enemy's military plan was a headache. Luckily, there were less than 10,000 people here. Even if they could affect his plan, it would be limited. Thinking of this, Zhu Huiyun's expression became much better. He looked at Mo Gui and said, "I understand. I will tell the army to be careful. I hope Mr. Mo can find out about this army as soon as possible and provide us with useful information to create a chance for my army to surround them." "Yes, Your Majesty." Mo Gui nodded calmly. He didn't know how important First Leng's division was to Zhu Huiyin. That wasn't something he should think about. He just needed to follow orders. Reality proved that Zhu Huiyin didn't pay enough attention to First Leng's division. Or rather, even if he did, he wouldn't be able to guard against them. Chapter 1527. Lang Son. It was the only way to enter Vietnam from the South Ming Empire. Previously, Yang Qindong had set up a shelter here called the Lang Son Shelter. It was specifically used to take in the Ming citizens who had escaped from the South Ming Empire. After they were registered, they were given a place to settle down. Gradually, a small market was formed, and there were 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers stationed here, and they were treated as the Lang Son army. However, when Zhu Huihua had led his troops south, this place had been taken over and became an important supply route for him. According to Zhu Huihua, Vietnam used to be the Annam province, and the Ming Empire had set up a regime here and managed this place. Now he was just reclaiming it. As for the fact that this place belonged to the Bugnam of Gojoseon and Yang Chindong, he did not mention a word, as though he had forgotten about it. This was what they meant by having a good reason to attack. This was what it meant to be a bitch, yet still want to build a monument to his chastity. This time, in order to deal a blow to Zhu Huihua's arrogance, Lung Yi-jun's main target was Lang Son. The reason why they chose this place was because it was an important supply route. As long as they controlled this place, the wealth that Zhu Huihua had plundered from Vietnam would not be able to be transported back to Guangxi. Secondly, by taking over this place, they would be able to cut off the retreat route of Zhu Huihua's troops. Following this, they could close the door and beat the dog, slowly playing a game of cat and mouse with the enemy. Since this place was so important, the 3 provincial armies would naturally be heavily garrisoned, with a total of 2,000 soldiers. To guard this place of less than 4 li, it could be said that they placed a lot of importance on this place. However, when Lung Yi Regiment's 1st Regiment Commander Cheng, who brought a regiment of soldiers here, the fate of these 2,000 soldiers was already decided. Regiment Commander, let our 1st Battalion be the vanguard. The 1st Battalion Commander, Feng Zhan, requested, Regiment Commander, our 2nd Battalion wants to be the vanguard. The 2nd Battalion Commander Wang Jinlong stood up and rushed to be the vanguard. Following that, the 3rd Battalion Commander Su Degang, 4th Battalion Commander Hu Jun, and even the Security Company Commander Sun Dewey also stood up, looking as though they wanted to be the vanguard. It was a good thing for the commanders and soldiers to have morale, but it was impossible for all of them to be the vanguard. This gave Commander Cheng a headache. In the end, he decided to be fair and said, "Stop King arguing. Battalions 1 to 4 attack from 4 directions. Remember, don't use guns if you don't have to. Don't let anyone escape. This regiment commander will lead the guards to guard the perimeter. You better not let anyone escape from your direction. If it's the battalion that escapes the most, he can keep his mouth shut the next time the vanguard attack. Do you understand?" If Chung were to sit down and patiently reason with these fierce generals, it would be very difficult to get through. Facing these people who claimed to be the boss of the world, he had to be even more domineering than them, or even be a bastard. It was common for him to curse. Sometimes the more it was like this, the more they would listen and even be convinced. When they heard Chung who say that all 4 battalions would be the vanguard, the 4 battalion commanders were immediately happy. They looked at each other, their eyes full of challenge and competition. The 1st Battalion Commander Feng Zhan patted his chest and said, "Rest assured, Commander, our 1st Battalion will not let a single enemy escape. Our 2nd Battalion will too." The 2nd Battalion Commander Wang Jinlong patted his chest, his face full of confidence. Soon, all 4 battalion commanders expressed their opinions. Chung, who saw this and was happy in his heart, but his mouth was unforgiving. "All right, don't brag in front of me. Whether it's a mule or a horse, let's take it for a walk. If someone escapes from your hands, then this regiment commander will punish them according to the law. At that time, don't be unconvinced. All right, I'll give you 2 hours to prepare. Now let's start." The 4 battalion commanders each led a direction and quickly left. With only 2 hours, they needed to move the troops to the designated location and formulate a plan of attack. Time was a bit tight. However, to the elite soldiers of the 1st Battalion, this was just child's play. In the past, who knew how many times they had practiced? Although this was not a drill and they were going to kill people on the battlefield, they would not feel any difference. When the training content was implanted in their bones, the difference between a drill and a real battle was only the difference between seeing blood and not seeing blood. However, to the soldiers of the 1st Battalion, although they rarely went to the battlefield, it did not mean that they had never gone to the battlefield before. When Yang Xie was still very weak, they had also gone to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Right now, they were just reliving that long-lost feeling, so what was the big deal? For battalions, each battalion had 4 companies, a total of 1,600 people. They quickly moved around the outskirts of Langsan, looking for a route to attack. Because of their movements, the sky gradually darkened. The 2 hours that Chung who had mentioned before was when the sky turned dark. For the regiment that was used to night training, this was not a problem at all. On the contrary, the soldiers of the 3 provinces who were already surrounded were a different story. As the sky slowly darkened, bonfires were lit all around the barracks of the 3 provinces. From time to time, there would be soldiers patrolling with swords and spears. However, most of the soldiers had already returned to the barracks built by the Lang Son army to rest. Vietnam had a tropical climate with heavy rainfall and high humidity throughout the year. Even at the end of January, the temperature was still minus 20 degrees Celsius. Even at night, it was still more than 10 degrees Celsius. Living here, there was no need to worry about the cold. Even if it was a simple barack, one would not feel cold sleeping in it. In an environment where there was no entertainment at night, as soon as the sky turned dark, most of the soldiers had already eaten dinner and gone to sleep. Only the officers, with their women in their arms, still had to work for a while. As a Chiliarch, as well as the garrison general of Langsan, Gung Chun, at this moment, there were 2 naked women waiting for him on his bed. At this moment, he was ready to do something. These 2 women were plundered by him from nearby areas, and they were quite pretty. Originally, their hometown was in Guangxi, but due to the chaos of war, they had reached a point where they could no longer live. After hearing that there was a stable job and a safe environment in the nearby Vietnam province, the family moved here and really lived a peaceful life for a period of time. What they did not expect was for the 3 provinces to suddenly charge in. They plundered their village, brutally killed their village's militia, and robbed their wealth. Even the decent women were taken away and became the playthings of the generals of the 3 provinces. Their beautiful life had just begun, but very quickly it returned to how it was before, causing the 2 women to want to cry but have no tears. If it was not for the fact that their families were still in the hands of the generals, and if they did not obey, they would have already committed suicide. With their weakness in the hands of others, they could not commit suicide, so they washed their faces with tears all day long. In Gung Chun's eyes, it made him very angry. He could not avoid another round of punches and kicks. Except for their faces, the 2 women were already full of scars. However, even so, they could not escape from Gung Chun's vicious hands at night. When night came to the 2 women, it was as though they had come to hell. However, they did not know that a new hope was right in front of them, because at this moment it was time for the 1st Regiment to make their move. After 2 hours, the soldiers of the 4 battalions had all returned to their positions. The battalion commander and a few company commanders sat together and quickly came up with a battle plan. It was worth mentioning that each battalion left a mobile company behind to prevent any enemies from escaping. They remembered the words of their regiment commander, Chung Hu, and did not want to lose the chance to fight again because of an enemy that escaped. When the clock on the military watch pointed at the same time, the 4 battalions of the Cold Vanguard Battalion darted out from the surrounding forest like leopards. Under the cover of the moonlight, their figures were like ghosts as they approached the camp of the 3 provinces. Every soldier was a corps member and had trained new recruits before and had been a squad leader before. There was even a certain proportion of soldiers, and the proportion was not low. They had all obtained good rankings in the competition. It was not an exaggeration to say that this kind of king's army was like using a cannon to kill a mosquito when facing the 3 provinces that did not have any vigilance. Many of the soldiers of the 3 provinces were recruited as able-bodied men. Being a soldier was not voluntary, and there was no need to talk about serious training. Often, they just relied on brute force to fight. These soldiers did not know what a night battle was, what a sneak attack was, what a close combat battle was, and what a special attack was. When faced with the cold vanguard battalion that was everywhere, they could only passively take a beating. They could not even make a sound. The first to make a move was the soldiers of the 1st Battalion. They set their sights on the patrolling soldiers of the 3 provinces that were guarding the east of them. There were exactly 10 patrolling soldiers, and it was the same number as a squad of the Cold Vanguard Battalion. After Battalion Commander Feng Zhan made a gesture, the 1st Company, 1st Platoon, and 1st Squad moved out. Based on the squad's usual formation, each soldier chose a corresponding position, and each soldier held a short dagger in their hands. After the patrolling soldiers passed by a bonfire and fell into darkness, they made their move. Looking from afar, one figure after another suddenly flew out of the darkness. Next, the figures fell to the ground one after another. Then, there was no movement at all. About 10 seconds later, the figure of the 1st Squad leader appeared from the darkness and made an okay gesture to the outside. We got them. The rest of the platoons attack immediately and kill those sleeping soldiers of the 3 provinces. Battalion Commander Feng Zhan chuckled and gave out the order softly. A large number of figures appeared behind him, and each of them moved in an orderly manner towards their target camp. Chapter 1528. This was just a small part of the battlefield. In the other parts of the Langshan camp, the same scene was happening at the same time. One after another, the patrolling soldiers were killed. One after another, the soldiers of the 3 provinces did not even have the chance to struggle before their souls returned to the underworld. In this battle, the 1st Regiment had no intention of taking any prisoners. Although these people were all Han, they had to be prepared to pay the price with their lives. Without taking any prisoners, all the soldiers did not have any misgivings when they took action. They could use whatever skills they had. However, what made them feel regretful was that there were too few opponents. More than 1,600 people were only enough to take care of 2,300 provincial king soldiers. Once a warrior killed more than 2 people, it usually meant that there were warriors who didn't kill anyone. They were not even on the same level. It was not an exaggeration to say that a 25-year-old adult was fighting a 2-year-old child. In less than a quarter of an hour, the 2,300 soldiers were all killed. Only Gung Chun was left in the main room. On the other hand, the 5-star army did not have a single death or injury. There were only a few people who had indignant expressions. It was clear that they had acted too late and did not manage to kill a single enemy. Sometimes war was also about equality. Leaving Gung Chun alive was not to say that no one could kill him, but to leave him for the regiment commander Chung Hu. When torches appeared in the camp, Regiment Commander Chung Hu walked into the main tent accompanied by the guards. Just now, he had divided a company of guards into 4 groups to prevent any enemies from escaping. They were not afraid of their whereabouts being exposed, but they felt that it was a disgrace to let the enemy escape from their hands when they were already prepared. However, what made Chung Hu gratified was that from the beginning to the end, not a single enemy had escaped. This was enough to prove that the performance of his 4 battalion commanders was perfect. When he walked into the main tent, he looked at Feng Zhan and the other battalion commanders with a look of praise. Regiment commander, all the enemies have been killed without leaving a single one. Right now, only their general is still in the main room. Do you want this subordinate to take care of him for you? Battalion Commander Feng Zhan walked up and smiled in a fawning manner. Scram. He casually kicked Feng Zhan's butt, who didn't dodge at all. Then he chuckled and said, "You've all had your fill. It's time for this leader to move his hands and feet." After saying that, Chung, who strode towards the main room. At this moment, he could already see that there were quite a few soldiers standing outside the main building. They had already surrounded the place and clearly pointed out the enemy general's position. In the main room, Gung Chun was still fast asleep. As soon as the sky turned dark, he would do some exercise. Then he would wake up in the middle of the night. In addition to the normal night patrol, he would also have to do some exercise. This had already become a routine of his life. The soldiers of the cold front moved very lightly, so Gung Chun was not disturbed. It was only when Chung, who walked into the main room with a few battalion commanders, that he suddenly felt something. His right hand instinctively reached under his pillow. There was a dagger there that could be used to injure the enemy in close combat. Get out! When his arm was less than a few inches away from the dagger, he suddenly felt a huge force coming from his arm. Then, Gung Chun felt his entire body fly up and directly hit the paper window of the main tent. His body flew out of the room. Find clothes for them to wear. Chung, who shook his head as he looked at the two Han women shivering under the blankets. Then he turned around and walked out with a face full of anger. In the open space outside the main room, the naked Gung Chun was looking around in horror. He looked at the soldiers of the 5-star army who were looking at him with smiles on their faces. He couldn't imagine how the outside world would become like this when he only took a short nap. Where did his soldiers go? Whether they died or ran away, why wasn't there any sound at all? He didn't feel like he slept very deeply, so why was it like this? Was this a dream? When he thought of this, Gung Chun slapped himself hard on the face. The sound was quite loud and painful. When the pain came, it attracted the laughter of the soldiers around him. This made him realize that this was not a dream, but reality. Do you think a slap can solve your evil deeds? At this time, Chung, who just happened to walk out of the main room, after seeing Gung Chun's actions, especially the naked scene, and thinking of the two Han women that he had taken advantage of, he couldn't help but feel angry. A person who couldn't even take care of his own body. How could he take care of the army? If this person was one of his soldiers, he would have been beheaded long ago. Chung, who strode out and stood in front of Gung Chun with a dark face. Who are you people? Do you know that I am the Chiliarch of the 3-star army? Are you trying to make an enemy of the 3-star army by doing this? Gung Chun had already exposed everything. At this moment, he didn't care about shame. Instead, he puffed out his chest and put on an aggressive appearance. Obviously, he wanted to gain the initiative by striking first. Make an enemy? You're not worthy. Chung Hu spat. Then he moved his arm and a short, sharp blade appeared in his hand. Then the blade flashed and a large wound appeared on Gung Chun's right arm. Ah! Gung Chun's arm was injured and he was bleeding a lot. The pain and the sense of shame made Gung Chun scream involuntarily. Chung, whose face remained indifferent, he took a step forward and waved his sharp blade. As invaders, the moment you made your move, you became the enemy of the 5-star army. Now, you still dare to threaten us with such big words? Swoosh! Another blade slashed down on his left arm. I'll fight you to the death. Both of his arms were injured. If this continued, he would become a bloody man. Gung Chun shouted and rushed forward. He wanted to fight back. In the face of the charging figure, Chung, who advanced instead of retreating. In the process of advancing, he leaned his body to the side and easily dodged the opponent's charge. Just as the two sides crossed each other, the sharp blade fell again. This time, it fell right between Gung Chun's crotch. Immediately, a small piece of meat was thrown into the air and separated from Gung Chun's body. Ah! Gung Chun, whose little penis was cut off, couldn't help but scream again. His voice was so miserable that it made everyone's expression change. Ching, who was unmoved. Instead, he continued to stride toward Gung Chun, who was shouting and shouting. As he walked, he said, bullying a woman and a Han woman at that. It's the same as bullying my sisters. You should be punished even more. Another blade flashed, and a foot-long wound appeared on Gung Chun's right leg. Finally, he couldn't run anymore and fell to the ground with a plop. Gung Chun, who had been stabbed 4 times in a row, looked at Cheng Hu, who was slowly walking toward him with a frightened expression. He shouted with all his strength, "Don't cut me anymore. Doesn't the 5-star army give preferential treatment to captives? I surrender, I surrender." Surrender? You're not worthy. After Cheng Hu's voice fell, he slashed several more times. None of them were fatal. They were all places with thick flesh and blood. Soon, Gung Chun, who had fallen to the ground and curled up into a ball, became a bloody man. His whole body was covered in blood and looked very scary. His body kept shaking for about 2 minutes. Finally, there was no movement. Just like that, the chilly arch of 3 provinces was scared to death by Cheng Hu. He was afraid that Cheng Hu would attack him again. With this fear in his heart, he died. When he died, his eyes bulged out. This was the most obvious sign of being scared to death. Phew! Cheng Hu exhaled. After killing Gung Chun, the depression in his heart dissipated a lot. When he opened his mouth again, he had already regained his composure. Show everyone the consequences of going against the 5-star army. Yes. Feng Zhan and the other battalion commanders were the first to agree. Following that, the other soldiers also agreed. At this moment, they didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt because of the cruel actions of their commander. Since they were going to become the enemy of the 5-star army, then they should have already prepared themselves for this. That night, the moonlight was brighter than usual. It was as if the clouds had parted to reveal the blue sky. On the night of the 1st Regiment's operation in Langsun, the 1st Regiment commander, Ting Shan, also came to Vietnam's Beijiang Prefecture and met with the governor, Zhang De. Ever since Vietnam was conquered by Yang Xie, there were 3 governors. They were Song Jie, Luan Shaoqian, and the current governor, Zhang De. Under the efforts of the 3 provincial governors, the entire Yunnan province could be said to have undergone a great change. The land was reclaimed, the minerals were mined, and various factories and workshops were set up everywhere. The people here were already living a good life with ample food and clothing. After Zhang De took over, he had the ambition to make this place even better. In fact, in the past 2 years, when he was developing in this direction, the sudden war disrupted everything. Not only did it cause many of the original plans to be unable to be realized, but it also caused the loss of a lot of territory and a lot of people. As the border between Vietnam and South Ming, Vietnam's military development wasn't considered backward. At the very least, there were 30,000 well-trained Vietnamese soldiers in the entire province. It was because when Myanmar was attacked, they had sent 20,000 soldiers to help. Now that the 3 provinces suddenly attacked, with only 10,000 soldiers, they naturally couldn't handle it. Lang Son, Kue Dai, and Lang Son fell one after another, forcing them to retreat to Beijiang Prefecture. But even there, they didn't dare to guarantee that they could hold on. In the past few days of fighting, they had already lost 6,000 soldiers. Now, there were only 4,000 left in the prefecture. Due to the invasion of the 3 provinces, Zhang De had started to recruit soldiers. However, the new recruits had no combat experience, and it was fine to let them fight. Chapter 1529. Without sufficient troops, Zhang De could only send telegrams back to Chichen City, at the same time going to the front lines to boost morale. During the day, the 3 provincial armies launched yet another assault, mobilizing a total of 10,000 men. Using the walls of Beijiang City, the Vietnamese army barely managed to hold on, but they also lost over 1,000 men, while another 2,000 were injured. Seeing that there were only 1,000 soldiers left, even though Zhang De was unwilling, he had no choice but to prepare to retreat. Right at this time, Ting Shan arrived together with the 3rd and 4th platoons of the 1st Regiment. Although there were only 4,000 of them, it was the Cold Vanguard, and it was the legendary Cold Vanguard, 1st Regiment. When Governor Zhang De heard the news, he personally went out to welcome them. When he saw Ting Shan, Tears immediately rolled down his cheeks. "Commander Teng, you're finally here." A young general beside Zhang De was also curiously sizing up the group of cold vanguard warriors in green military uniforms. When he saw the pitch-black muskets on their backs, he couldn't help but reveal an envious expression. However, when he saw that there weren't many of them and heard that there were only about 4,000 of them, he couldn't help but reveal a look of disappointment. This time, the three provincial armies had mobilized a total of 120,000 men. Even if they had suffered some losses along the way, they were still left with 100,000 men. Could these 4,000 men really hold on? He had his doubts. This young general was called Chen Bai, and his father was one of the famous generals of Annan province, Chindi. When Yang Qindong reclaimed this place, he had contributed greatly and was appointed as one of the generals of Annan province. Furthermore, his family was allowed to stay here forever. In the blink of an eye, more than a decade had passed, and Chindi had grown old. As such, he recommended his son, Chen Bai, to replace him. This time, when the three provincial armies attacked, it was Chen Bai who led the army to defend. Just from the looks of the battle, it was not easy for him to achieve this. After all, to be able to order the organized army to retreat while fighting under a surprise attack and give the civilians at the rear some time to prepare for the scorched earth clearing work, he could already be considered a suitable young general. "Governor Zhang, you've worked hard. How's the situation now?" After shaking hands with Governor Zhang De, Ting Shan asked with concern. "It's not looking good." "Right, let me introduce you. Qin Di, this is Commander Ting Shan of the Cold Vanguard, 1st Regiment. Commander Teng, this is General Chen Bai, who has been fighting with the three provincial armies. Oh, his father is Qin Di. He is one of the three generals appointed by the 6th young master." Hearing that Chen Bai's father was Qin Di, Ting Shan could not help but take a closer look at him. Under normal circumstances, foreign generals were not trusted by Han generals, and this was naturally due to Yang Qindong's influence. He had already said the phrase, "Those who are not of my race must have a different heart," countless times, but all the old people who had been with him for a long time all knew this. However, Chen Bai was Qindidi's son. Qin Di had surrendered to Yang Qindong when Yang Qindong was still very weak. When Yang Qindong occupied Annan at that time, he had made great contributions. So much so that when the Great Migration was carried out, the Chen family was allowed to stay in Yunnan province. From that point of view, Chen Di's son could still be trusted. Not to mention, Chen Bai performed well in the face of the three provincial armies' attack. With a small number of troops, he managed to block the main force of more than 100,000 soldiers from the three provincial armies. Although he was also forced to retreat, it was not easy for him to do so. "Hello, General Qin." At the thought of this, Teng Shan took the initiative to extend his right hand to Qin Bai. Hello, Commander Teng. I've heard a lot about you." Qin Bai was very excited as he hurriedly wiped his hands with his clothes before shaking hands with Ting Shan. Ting Shan's first impression of Qin Bai was not bad. At the very least, he was not like some Han generals who would not even look at foreign generals. Just based on this point, Qin Bai recognized him as a teacher. After exchanging greetings, they naturally began to talk about the battle in Beijiang Prefecture. Using Governor Zhang De's words, the situation was extremely critical now. If Teng Shan hadn't rushed over, they would have been defeated in the battle tomorrow and lost Beijiang Prefecture. Once Beijiang Prefecture, which was an important transportation route, was taken, they would be able to go to Fuliang or Biandong at will. If that were to happen, they would be in a passive position. After listening to Governor Zhang De's words carefully and seeing that Chen Bai had the same thoughts, Ting Shan smiled and said, "I understand what you two mean. Beijiang Prefecture is an important transportation route. We can't lose it, right?" "Yes." Governor Zhang De nodded solemnly. Once this place was lost, it would affect more prefectures. If that were to happen, Yunnan province would be destroyed. In that case, he would become a sinner. "Okay, I understand. In that case, Beijiang Prefecture will become an impenetrable fortress, and no one will be able to take a step into this place. Tung Shan nodded solemnly before speaking in a heroic manner. Although he had only brought 2 regiments with him for this trip, with a total of about 4,000 people, with the advanced firearms in their hands and the city walls as their support, the 100,000 soldiers from the 3 provinces really couldn't do anything to him. In fact, if it weren't for Yang Qindong's telegram, he would have probably led Leng Yi's division to attack Zhu Huihua's lair directly if they were to stabilize the situation. However, military orders had to be obeyed. Since Yang Qindong had sent him a telegram, he had to execute it. As for the reason behind this, it was not something that a mere teacher like him could ask. If the 6th young master wanted to tell him, he would naturally tell him. Since he didn't, he wouldn't get an answer even if he asked. Tung Shan's arrival gave Zhang De, Qin Bai, and the rest some reassurance. However, Leng Yi's division only had more than 4,000 people, after all. Whether or not they could defeat the attack of the 3 provinces tomorrow would depend on reality. They would wait and see. Some people spent the night in apprehension. On the other hand, the Cold Blade warriors who had just arrived all had a good night's sleep. It was also one of the subjects of their usual training. They would rest when they were supposed to, so as to ensure that they had sufficient energy for the upcoming battle. If a soldier didn't know how to rest, he wouldn't be considered a good soldier. The night passed peacefully. On the morning of the 2nd day, the soldiers of the cold front had just finished their breakfast when they heard the thunderous sound of war drums. When Tung Shan and the others reached the top of the city wall, they could see from afar that the army of the 3 provinces was slowly approaching. From afar, the army of the 3 provinces looked quite imposing. For example, the neat formation, the horizontal and vertical lines, the flags, and the many pitch-black cannons that were slowly advancing were all proof that this was a well-trained army. They've even brought out the cannons. Seems like they're definitely going to take down Beijiang Prefecture. When General Chen Bai saw this scene, there was some shock in his eyes. Although the previous attacks were also intense, the other party didn't bring out the cannons. However, the fact that they brought out the cannons this time was enough to prove their determination. Similarly, in the face of the cannons' attack, Beijiang Prefecture definitely wouldn't be able to defend if it was still in his hands. Even if it was in the hands of the Cold Blade warriors, Qin Bai wasn't confident enough. He couldn't help but look at Commander Tung Shan, who was beside him. If one was suspicious, one had to use them. That was the philosophy that Yang Qindong had used for the generals of foreign races. That was precisely the reason that Yang Qindong wouldn't arrange any cannons for them in ordinary provinces, in case something really went wrong and they got hurt. That was also the reason why Chen Bai was so unfamiliar and fearful of cannons. However, when faced with the same problem, Tung Shan and the rest of the Cold Blade warriors weren't unfamiliar with it at all. On the contrary, when they saw the enemy's cannons, they even turned to look at the 2 commanders behind them and chuckled. That's an 80mm cannon. Its muzzle isn't small. Based on their technology, it shouldn't be an explosive round, but a solid round like the Red Barbarian cannon. There's nothing to be afraid of, 3rd Leader Fong Hao said with a chuckle. The larger the caliber of the cannon, the more powerful it would be. However, it would also be more troublesome to manufacture. If it was a cannon with a small caliber, they would have to consider if the other party was going to use exploding shells. After all, those things were complicated to manufacture, and they were really powerful. However, with such a large caliber, the chances of them being exploding shells would be extremely slim. Since it wasn't exploding shells, what was there to be afraid of? As long as they could identify the trajectory of the enemy's cannons, experienced people would be able to dodge them easily. Yes, there's nothing to be afraid of. 3rd Commander, I'll leave these cannons to you. I don't want to see the city wall of Beijiang Prefecture being hit by a cannonball, even if it's a solid shell. Do you understand? Tung Shan immediately made a request. Yes, Master. Fong Hao was fearless about such a request. He immediately stood at attention and saluted before walking away. That made 4th Commander Qin Zaiqiang, who was at the side, extremely envious. He was still thinking, if I were the one who took on the task just now, would I be the one to destroy the enemy's cannons? Okay, Commander Qin, you don't have to be envious. Immediately send the soldiers of your 4th Regiment to the city tower. After the enemy's cannons are destroyed, they will definitely launch a siege. That will be the time for you to perform. Remember, don't waste any bullets, understand? Ting Shan obviously could tell what Qin Zaiqiang meant. Hence, he gave the order to the 4th Regiment. Yes, please rest assured, Master. Watch the performance of the 4th Regiment, Qin Zaiqiang chuckled. Putting on a performance was enough to prove his confidence and his recognition of the marksmanship of the soldiers of the 4th Regiment. Chapter 1530. The troops of the 3 provinces did not stop advancing, but because the cannons were too heavy, their speed of advancement was not very fast. They seemed to be trying to scare the Vietnamese army with that formation and instill fear in them. In that case, once the cannons landed, the city of Beijiang Prefecture might collapse on its own. Wang Zhanjiang, the commander of the troops of the 3 provinces, was very proud of that move. He had already asked around and found out that there were only slightly more than 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers in Beijiang Prefecture, in front of his army of 100,000 soldiers. That was not even enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. If it were in the past, he might not even take out something as good as the cannons. After all, it was one of his trump cards that he would only use in times of crisis. However, the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huifu, sent someone to inform him that the elite Lung Fong of the 5-star army was about to arrive at the battlefield in Vietnam. That was an army of pure firearms, which made Wang Zhanjiang feel the pressure. He was determined not to wait any longer. Hence, he took out the cannons with the intention of completely conquering Beijiang Prefecture. By then, he would be able to go anywhere. By then, even if the Lung Fong came, they would not be able to do anything to him if they had too few people. With full confidence, the cannons appeared and pressed towards the front of Beijiang Prefecture. At this moment, Fang Hao, the commander of the 3rd Regiment, had also led the regiment's artillery battery up the city tower and began adjusting the cannons. He did not forget Commander Tingshan's words just now. He did not allow any cannons to land on the city walls of Beijiang Prefecture. In other words, he could not give the enemy a chance to fire the cannons. Even so, he had to speed up. 6 100mm mortars were placed on the city tower. Commander Fang Hao personally took command and tested the first cannonball. Everyone listened to the command and prepared for the first test shot. Target: enemy cannons. High 2, 3, 3. 3 to the north, 2 to the east, 2 to the right, 6 to the right, fire! Boom! A cannonball was fired from the barrel and blasted towards the troops of the 3 provinces that were slowly approaching. After the sound of the cannons, there was the sound of the cannonballs exploding. Under the aftermath of the explosion, when the cannonballs landed in the middle of the army of the 3 provinces, a small piece of empty space was blasted open. Within 30 to 40 feet of the explosion, all the soldiers of the 3 provinces were either killed or injured. A cannonball landed and injured some of the soldiers of the 3 provinces, but it did not hit any of the cannons. Instead, it exploded a few feet behind the cannons. Looking at this scene, Fang Hao muttered, "The goat's horns are a little high." "Come on, adjust a little more and get ready to fire." After just one round, Fang Hao already had a good idea of where the cannon would land. When he opened his mouth again, his face was filled with confidence. Target: enemy artillery. The 6 cannons were positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The north side was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The north side was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. The direction was positioned 2 or 3 times higher, and the direction was positioned 2 or 3 times higher. 3, 2, 1, fire! After Fang Hao recited a series of professional terms, The 6 cannoneers continuously adjusted the direction of the cannons in their hands. When the number 1 was finished, the 6 cannoneers simultaneously sounded. Then, the 6 cannoneers landed on the ground. The cannoneers flew over the city walls and landed on the soldiers of the 3 provinces. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. After the adjustments, the accuracy of the cannoneers greatly increased. Out of the 6 cannonballs, a total of 4 cannonballs hit the enemy cannons. This attracted the cheers of Governor Zhang Da and General Chen on the city walls. What's going on? Commander Fang Hao did not look happy at all. On the contrary, he turned his head and stared fiercely at the 2 cannoneers who did not hit the target. He looked at the 2 cannoneers who lowered their heads and did not speak. It was normal for the cannoneers to have some deviation, not to mention that the enemy cannons were constantly moving. Although the speed was very slow, it was still moving. To be able to hit 4 out of 6 cannoneers was already a very good result. In any cold vanguard division, such a standard was enough to make them proud. However, the problem was that this was the first division of the Lungfeng division. These people were all instructors. Even the 2 cannoneers had taught thousands of students. Now that it was their turn to attack, they actually missed. It was really a terrible feeling. After being reprimanded by Fang Hao, the 2 cannoneers also became ruthless. They first stood up and observed the position of the target. Then, they ordered someone to reload the cannoneers and fired the cannoneers. Fortunately, they finally hit the target this time. The cannoneers landed less than 10 feet away from the cannoneers of the 3 provinces. The powerful shockwave directly destroyed the cannoneers and overturned them on the ground. Cannoneers were fired one after another. The cannoneers of the 3 provinces had 1 less cannon after another. Within a short period of time, all 30 cannoneers were destroyed. As expected, Commander Tingshan's request was met. Not a single cannoneer was allowed to land on the city walls of Beijiang Prefecture. This result also shocked Zhang De and Chen who were watching at the side. They did not expect the cannoneers of the 1st Division of the Lungfeng Division to be so powerful. While the 1st Division of the Lungfeng Division was impressive, the soldiers of the 3 provinces suffered. When the commander of the troops, Wang Zhanjiang, saw that the 30 cannoneers that he had sent out had all been destroyed before they could even reach the designated firing position, he was infuriated. Someone order the front troops to launch an attack. Their cannoneers may be powerful, but there's a limit to the number of cannoneers they have. Are they going to blow up all our soldiers? The truth was just as Commander Tingshan had expected. After the cannoneers failed, the soldiers of the 3 provinces launched a ground attack. After receiving the order, 10,000 soldiers of the 3 provinces rushed towards Beijiang Prefecture like an avalanche. Hee, good timing. Everyone, listen up. Aim at the target before you fire. Don't embarrass us. Try to eliminate 1 enemy with 1 bullet. The 4th Regiment commander, Chen Zaiqiang's yell resounded throughout the entire city tower of Beijiang Prefecture. Afterwards, when the 2 sides were about 400 to 500 steps away, the soldiers of the Lungfeng Division began firing. As the bullets whizzed out of the barrels, the soldiers of the 3 provinces who were charging at the front fell into a pool of blood one after another. From afar, it looked like they were harvesting chives. They were in a neat and orderly manner. More and more soldiers of the 3 provinces fell in the path of the charge, making the soldiers behind who were ready to attack look terrified. They were humans of flesh and blood. They wouldn't do such a foolish thing if they still wanted to attack, despite knowing that they were going to die. Fortunately, Wang Zhanjiang did not intend to force them. After seeing the amazing marksmanship of the Lungfeng Division, he knew that the morale of the soldiers was now in a mess. If they were to attack, they might not succeed even if they had to pay a huge price. Since that was the case, he had no choice but to order the entire army to stop attacking and retreat. It seemed that the attack this time was as loud as thunder, but small as raindrops. The 3 provinces came and went. On the city tower, Zhang De, Qin Bai, and the rest couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief before cheering. They finally believed that even though the number of Lung Feng soldiers was small, they would have no problem defending Beijiang Prefecture with them around. Tung Shan, who had long known everything, watched calmly as the soldiers of the 3 provinces retreated. He was still thinking that if he were to launch an attack now, he would definitely be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Unfortunately, military orders had to be obeyed. His mission was only to defend Beijiang Prefecture, and he couldn't doubt anything else. After Wang Zhanjiang retreated, he even sent someone to report the appearance of Lung Feng to the 3 provincial kings immediately. Lung Feng's sudden appearance had indeed caught everyone off guard. However, in the letter, Wang Zhanjiang expressed that he would continue to work hard even if he failed this time. He did not mention whether he would be able to withstand Lung Feng's attack. Perhaps he didn't even think about whether the 5-star army, which only had a few thousand soldiers, would dare to attack their 100,000-strong army. That was the outcome that Yang Qindong wanted. It all started with a secret telegram sent by Yao Ingjun. Yao Ingjun, the backbone of the security bureau, was also one of the elders. Due to his good looks, he was arranged to stay by Zhu Huiyun's side. He got to know Zhu Lian, the princess of Yongxing County, and won her heart. In the end, Zhu Huiyun rebelled, which also meant that his mission was completed and he could return to the security bureau to report. However, he didn't do that and instead protected Zhu Lian to escape from the clutches of the demons. He then formed an opposing force and started causing trouble behind Zhu Huiyun's back. Although Yao Ingjun left with Zhu Lian, he still arranged for some intelligence personnel to stay by Zhu Huiyun's side. Although they were not important figures, they could still find out some information that outsiders couldn't. Not long ago, the spy sent some information that a Mr. Mo had become a frequent visitor of the 3 provincial kings' residences. According to their observations, this person should have a certain connection with the higher-ups of Yangxia. For example, Zhu Huiyun found out about Lang Yi's reinforcements in Yuanan province in advance. There was actually such a thing. After Yao Ingjun found out, he naturally didn't dare to be careless. He immediately used the radio to report to the higher-ups. When it was sent to Yang Qindong, he was really shocked. How powerful was the Yang faction? Everyone who was involved in it had a deep feeling. With such a powerful backing, Yang Qindong couldn't figure out who would side with an outsider. He didn't believe that Zhu Huiyun had arranged for someone to enter Yangxia in advance. It wasn't that he looked down on the 3 provincial kings, but this person didn't have such vision. From the information reported by Yao Ingjun, the person who contacted Zhu Huiyun knew a lot of things. This proved that the person's rank wasn't too low. Then it was a high-level cadre? Who could it be? Yang Qindong felt a chill down his spine when he thought about how there were spies among the senior officers under his command, or people who had done something unfavorable to him. If this tumor wasn't dealt with, then wouldn't he have to sleep with one eye open? Chapter 1531. In addition, if the other party was a high-ranking officer with military authority, didn't that mean that his family in Qiqin City could be in danger at any time? Although Yang Wu had always been responsible for the safety of the royal palace, it was still reassuring. But he couldn't guard against the unsuspecting. Besides, Yang Qindong didn't like being on the defensive all the time. He had to find out the big traitor, and to achieve this goal, he couldn't kill Zhu Huiqiang now. Otherwise, what if the traitor disappeared again when he saw that things were not going well? He wanted to personally meet Zhu Huiyun and see if there was a chance to find this traitor. Yang Qindong even had a feeling that even Zhu Huiyun didn't know who the person who had given him information on Yangxia was. This was the truly frightening part. This was why Yang Qindong had sent a telegram to Tingshan, ordering him not to take the initiative to attack. All he needed to do was defend Beijiang Prefecture and prevent the 5 provinces' army from entering Vietnam to cause trouble. The timely appearance of Beijiang Prefecture's 1st Division, Lung, had thwarted their plan to enter Vietnam. When the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Then his gaze fell on the Timur Empire that was surrounded by enemies. Because of the heavy snow, the 5-Star Army's attack had been forced to stop. While they were resting, they had also begun another operation, and that was to cause internal strife in the Timur Empire. After repeated battles, the situation had undergone a fundamental change. Of the 200,000 cavalry of the Timur Empire, 100,000 had been heavily injured, leaving only 150,000. The military strength of the Timur Empire had been severely weakened. The main forces of the 5-Star Army had smoothly joined forces, forming a massive encirclement around the enemy, turning it into a beast in a cage. As a result, the people of the Timur Empire were in a state of panic. Other than the Crimean Army and the distant Yusing Army, the other khaganates had all fallen into the hands of Yang Xie. They had no outside help or hope. With these three advantages, the people of the Timur Empire were in a state of panic. There were many people who feared death and many who wanted to surrender, just like when they had dealt with the Golden Horde. The reason they had been able to achieve victory so quickly and easily was largely due to the surrender of Grey and the others. Even when they had destroyed the Ross Duchy, wasn't it because of Peter and the others? In history, wasn't it also because of Wu Sanggui's sacrifice that the Qing army had been able to conquer the world? All of this proved one thing. Even the strongest fortress could be easily breached from the inside. Yang Chendong was searching for the Timur Empire's most powerful clans. The Timur Empire's most powerful clans, head of the Timur Empire. Odin Gerald represented the entire shaman family, which was once a glorious existence. The Timur of the Timu, S's when the Great Khan's Great Khan, the Timu's the Timur. The Timu's SAA's AAS Aahi. In the Timur Empire, the Timur Empire's shaman clan was also the most powerful clan. No one dared to look down on them. Perhaps it was because he was afraid of death, or perhaps it was because he was dissatisfied with being suppressed by the Great Khan. But in any case, the head of the shaman clan, head of the Timur Empire, secretly sent people out of the city to contact the 5-Star Army. They expressed their willingness to help the 5-Star Army get rid of this huge problem. With head of the Timur Empire's cooperation, Yang Chendong immediately abandoned the small and medium clans of the Timur Empire that had contacted him. After all, the destruction of the Timur Empire was certain. It was only a matter of time. Since that was the case, the more people he needed to cooperate with, the greater the price he would have to pay. In that case, it would be better to only contact head of the Timur Empire. Even if there were benefits, it would only benefit one clan. It was better than having more foreign clans benefit from it. The dispatched envoy quickly returned to the city and met with Odin Gerald. He expressed that the 5-Star Army had accepted their good intentions. He also stated that once they took over the entire Timur Empire, the shaman family would receive special protection, and they would even be able to keep 1/10 of their wealth. This was exactly what head of the Timur Empire wanted. Now that the 5-Star Army had agreed, he could do some things with peace of mind. Head of the Timur Empire was not worried that the 5-Star Army would play tricks on him. Once they did so, the 5-Star Army would find it even more difficult to find people who would cooperate with them in the future. There was no enmity between the two of them, so why must they make things difficult for him? Knowing that the 5-Star Army wouldn't go back on their word, Odin Gerald called over all the clan leaders and explained the 5-Star Army's reply. Previously, the family had held a meeting to discuss the surrender of the 5-Star Army. Back then, it had been unanimously approved. Now that everyone was informed, it was time for them to take action. As expected of one of the greatest nobles, the descendants of the shaman family had already infiltrated all walks of life in the Timur Empire. Even in the army, there were many disciples. Once these people gathered together, the power they could display was very strong. Even Khan Amor had to give them some face. When the entire family was mobilized, the locations of the Timur Empire's hidden troops were quickly exposed and sent to the five-star army. After all, the daily consumption of these troops wasn't small. They wouldn't appear for no reason, so they needed someone to send them supplies. As long as someone sent them, it was equivalent to having a clue. Under careful investigation, some secrets were no longer secrets. After sending the information to the five-star army, Odin-Geril set his sights on great General Mandu Latu. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to confront the five-star army without falling into a disadvantage was due to the terrain. First, it was due to the complex terrain of the country. There were mountains everywhere. Once the safety of the country wasn't ensured, the army would face the danger of having their retreat cut off. This meant that there wasn't enough supplies to make up for it. This was a very dangerous matter for an army that was marching. The army was scattered and used guerrilla warfare to attack the logistics of the five-star army, as well as some lone troops. This created a lot of pressure for the five-star army. This was also the reason why Yang Chindong didn't move forward. And the instigator of all this was great General Mandu Latu. Odin-Geril contacted him in order to persuade him. Even if he wasn't used by the five-star army, at least he shouldn't be an enemy of the five-star army. Regarding the arrival of Odungeril, Mandu Latu, who was in the mansion, didn't feel any surprise. Judging from his calm face, this seemed to be something he had expected long ago. Speaking of which, who wouldn't know about the filthy matters between the Shaman clan and Kanamor if they were well informed? If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of the five-star army, Great Kanamor would have been cleaning up the internal strife in the Timur Empire. It could also be said that the arrival of the five-star army saved the Shaman family and prevented them from being cleaned up so quickly. After all, in the face of an external enemy, a ruler that had to deal with internal strife wasn't a confident ruler, because doing so would only cause pain to those close to him and delight his enemies. Not all of them were as stubborn as Baldi Jiang. It was precisely because he understood this that Mandu Latu didn't think that Odin-Geril's actions were strange. He could see that once Great Khan Amor won this battle, the next to deal with Odin-Geril would be Great Khan Amor. Taking advantage of the chaos, how could they be willing to wait helplessly for death? How could they not do something? In the main hall of his mansion, Mandu Latu received Odin-Geril. In the huge hall, there were only the two of them at this moment. All the servants had been sent out. Looking at the scene in front of him, the smile on Odin-Geril's face didn't diminish. At this time, he didn't know how to describe this great General Mandu Latu, who was strategizing on the battlefield. Receiving him in the main hall and not in the secret room, this showed that the other party had a clear conscience. So even if Great Khan Amor knew about this matter, he couldn't directly blame him. He then drove everyone out of the hall, making it no different from a secret room. This allowed Odin-Geril to speak his mind without worry. This kind of behavior took into account the wishes and thoughts of both sides. From this point alone, it was clear that Mancharatl was a smart man, and Odin-Geril liked to deal with smart people. So after he sat down, the first thing he said was, "Great General, have you made your choice?" This was indeed a straightforward question. When Mandu Latu heard it, the other party was stunned for a moment. Obviously, he didn't expect Odin-Geril to be so direct. But the other party asked directly, and he couldn't answer directly. Since he could become a great general who was in charge of hundreds of thousands of troops, he naturally didn't like to be passive, but was very willing to take the initiative. Regarding this question, he didn't answer, but just chuckled and said, "Odin-Geril, you should drink tea first." This tea was obtained from the Han people, and it cost this great general a lot of money. Asking and not answering, Odin-Geril didn't find it strange after hearing it. If the other party gave an answer to his question, then he would find it strange. Smiling, Odin-Geril picked up the teacup in front of him and took a sip. He immediately praised, "Not bad, it is indeed a good tea. The Han people have a long history, and some of their good things are not something we can compare to. If one day we can live with them, drink this kind of tea every day and taste delicious food, that would be a happy thing. Is great general right? Chapter 1532. Soon, the topic changed from drinking tea to the main topic. When Mandu Latu heard this, he couldn't help but admire the other party's quick-wittedness. But he still couldn't answer directly, so he smiled and said, "Are we going to the Han people's place? I'm afraid they won't welcome us." "How do you know without trying? Speaking of which, I have some friendship with the Han people, especially the King Wunan of Damyang. We have already established a connection. Presumably, as a friend, if I make a small request, he will certainly satisfy it." Odin Gerald had a very sincere smile on his face, giving people the feeling that he and Yang Qindong were old friends. In front of a general, talking about the benefits of the enemy's commander-in-chief was already a taboo, but Odin Gerald didn't care at all. Obviously, he had already made up his mind and wasn't going to change it. After hearing these words, Mandu Latu became silent. After probing again and again, Odin Gerald finally pointed out the main topic. At this moment, he had no choice but to express his attitude. It's just that this attitude was really not easy to express. He already knew that the 3 provincial kings of the southern Ming Empire and Banj Empire were acting separately. Now, the 5-star army's backyard should be on fire. At this moment, it's not the time to make a final decision. If the 5-star army couldn't withstand this pressure and withdrew back to their country to quell the chaos, then the danger of the Timur Empire would be eliminated. Then, Great Khan Amor would be victorious. At this time, standing on Odungrel's side, wouldn't it be suicidal? Mandu Latu had his own worries and thoughts, so he didn't answer this question immediately. In this regard, Odin Gerald, who saw everything in his eyes, wasn't surprised. On the contrary, he was a little happy. He was most afraid of the other party's rejection. If that's the case, then whatever he wants to say will be useless. It's not impossible for the other party to directly capture him and send him to the Great Khan. Although he had already made this decision on the way here, he still didn't want the worst result to happen, because it means that whether the Great Khan Amor wins or loses in the end, he will be a loser. Therefore, what he wanted was for the other party to remain silent. Only then would he have the opportunity to speak more of his thoughts. "General, I know what you're hesitating about. I also know what you're worried about. However, I don't know if you've thought about it, but the Timur Empire's current state is not due to Amur's contributions alone, nor is it due to his father, Abu Said Mirza's contributions. Instead, it is the result of everyone's efforts. But now he thinks that his position is stable, so he wants to get rid of those who disagree with him. If he wants to monopolize everything, will others allow it? Today, they made an example out of our shaman clan. Once they succeed and get the benefits, they might make an example out of someone else. For example, Great General, if you can defeat the 5-star army this time, then your contribution will be so great that I'm afraid it will cause some people to be vigilant. The Han people have a saying, "Great contributions shake the Lord," and there is another saying, "After the birds have flown, the bow is put away." When that time comes, do you think you will still be valued and not be suspected? Speaking up to here, Odungrel couldn't help but sneer. I'm afraid that when that time comes, the fate of our shaman clan will be a lesson to you, Great General. At this moment, Mandu Latu's face finally trembled. To be honest, it wasn't that he didn't consider this problem, but he thought that with the shaman clan in front of him, the Great Khan would definitely not make a move on him. But what Odungrel said was right. Once the shaman clan was dealt with, what would happen? He would become the one who stood out. And with Amur's suspicious nature, even if he lost his military power, it would be difficult for him to have a good ending. This was the saying, accompanying a ruler is like accompanying a tiger. This was the sorrow of a capable minister. If a capable minister met a good master, then perhaps it would be better. But once they met a master with a strong jealousy, the end result was predictable. History, also proved that a capable minister didn't have a good ending. Mandu Latu's face changed. This was a good change. In O'Dungrill's eyes, he was confident. But he still felt that it wasn't enough, so he continued, "At least the great general is worried about whether the 5-star army will withdraw or not. This is actually not a problem. A Han army that even destroyed the Golden Horde, how could it easily submit to a small Bangra and the southern Ming king? Even if he has no choice but to retreat for the time being, look at our surroundings. The previous Khanates no longer exist. Only the Khanate of Crimea is left. Once the 5-star army takes care of their own backyard, how are we going to face them? Yes, the Khanate. At that time, will there still be people who will find trouble with the 5-star army and attract their attention? Great General, don't you think how unreliable is it to entrust the hope of survival to others? This shouldn't be your style, right?" Even O'Dungrill said this. At this moment, Mandu Latu didn't know what to say. At this moment, he had to admit that O'Dungrill was indeed a good diplomat. In the face of such a person, he had already lost a round in terms of language. "Okay, but I don't know what kind of agreement you have with the King Wunan of Daemyong. What can I do? What can I get in return?" Finally, Mandu Latu lowered his head. Not for anything else. Even if he wasn't afraid of death, he still had to consider the safety of his family and dozens of people. He could die on the battlefield, but that was under the premise that the great Khan guaranteed the safety of his family. If he died, and his family also died, then he would be the greatest sinner, and he would die with everlasting regret. Ha ha ha. O'Dungrill finally laughed. He knew that the matter was settled. His nemesis, Amor, would not live for long. He was about to win, although this victory was at the cost of his country. But for him, if he didn't borrow the power of the 5-star army, the one who would die in the end would be him. If he didn't even have his life, what country would he talk about? What nation would he talk about? It was a day later that Yang Chindong got the news. When he saw the messenger sent by O'Dungrill, saying that Mandu Latu would also surrender, but please give him the same treatment as the shaman family, he agreed without hesitation. Even Yang Chindong had to admit that this Mandu Latu was a difficult opponent. The guerrilla warfare he used, combined with the terrain, really gave him a headache. But if he could just spare this person's life in exchange for victory, of course, he wouldn't object. If the other party was willing, he would even put him in an important position. But this was just an idea. Mandu Latu was different from O'Dungrill. The latter really hated Amor, so much so that he hated the entire Timur Empire. Mandu Latu was different. He had no choice but to surrender for the safety of his family and the general situation. Such a person still had a national complex. So even if you used him, what could he do if he didn't put in any effort? Let's not think about this first. At least Mandu Latu was on his side. Yang Chindong was now ready for everything except for the east wind. This east wind was the time when the ice and snow would melt. March 1465 AD. The heavy snow that hadn't been seen in 100 years finally began to melt. The 5-star army that surrounded the Timur Empire also began to move. They began to march forward in several different directions. Amor, who received the news, was shocked, but he didn't panic. He immediately sent someone to inform Mandu Latu and let him move the arranged ambushes to disrupt the 5-star army's line of sight, cut off the enemy's logistical supplies, and delay the enemy's advance. As long as the time passed, the 5-star army would have the possibility of retreating. Although the city was very lively this winter, due to the current tense situation, many people jumped out to surrender. But Amor had never doubted his great general, Mandu Latu. He understood the other party. This was a smart person. In addition, he knew that the shaman family was his current enemy. As long as the situation wasn't so bad that it couldn't be saved, he could use this person without worry. If one were to say that Amor was indeed suspicious, then which monarch wouldn't be? Even Yang Chindong was suspicious of people and had to use them, but it also depended on the person. For example, Mandu Latu, he did not have too many doubts. although he knew that many people had gone to him during this period. The informants he sent told him that the Supreme General had not made any move to deploy troops. This made him completely relieved. What he didn't know was that he didn't need Mandulatu's order to move the troops. He only needed to tell Odungrel where the troops were hidden and let him pass on the information to the 5-star army. Just like when Great Khan Amor gave the order to Mandaratu to start guerrilla warfare, the 5-star army was also encircling and annihilating the Timur Empire's army that was hiding in various places and didn't know that their positions had been exposed. With the 1st Cavalry Division of the World's Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division, as long as they had a clear target, they could appear as fast as they could without the obstruction of the heavy snow. Then they would charge, and there was no more after that. Unless they had firearms, no one would be a match for these two powerful cavalry units. Over the years, the soldiers of the two armies had become accustomed to living on horses. They could easily sleep, eat, and kill enemies on horseback. After countless battles, they had rich combat experience. They knew what kind of battle formation to face the enemy and how to find the enemy's weak point in the shortest time to attack. It was as if these things had fused with their lives. This was all thanks to the large and small battles they had experienced. As the saying goes, a long illness makes a doctor. Now, the strength of the two armies was so strong that they were invincible. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if Genghis Khan was alive, his most elite cavalry might not be a match for these two armies. Chapter 1533. With such powerful fighting strength, the outcome of the battle was easy to imagine. Even if they took into account the time they spent on the long journey, it only took a month for the Timur Empire's army of 100,000 to be completely wiped out. Those who didn't die were captured. Due to the lack of information, Amor didn't know about this matter. Even Mandaratl, who had betrayed the army, didn't know that the battle would end so quickly. As the good news came in one after another, the 5-star army's main force finally didn't have to worry about anything and could attack Herat without any worries. After a month and a half, the first 5-star army suddenly arrived at the capital. When Khan Amor heard the news, his expression changed greatly, and he shouted that it was impossible. He didn't believe that the 5-star army would take the risk to appear outside the capital before the problem with the supply route was solved. Didn't they know that if they couldn't successfully take down the capital, they would become an isolated army? Wasn't that very dangerous? With all kinds of disbelief, Amor climbed up the city gate tower and saw an unbelievable scene. He saw more and more 5-star banners appearing in all directions. Not only that, he also saw many carriages and mules carrying supplies rushing to the enemy camp outside the city. From afar, he could see that there weren't many enemy soldiers escorting the supplies. In other words, they didn't suffer any attacks or harassment during the process. What's going on? What's going on? After a series of shouts, Amor ordered someone to summon Mandaratl. He wanted to ask his great general. Regretfully, he sent people out, but when they reached the great general's residence, it was already empty. Mandaratl had actually disappeared into thin air. After hearing the news, Amor's face was incomparably pale. At this time, even if he reacted slowly, he knew that this great general must have betrayed him and exposed the location of the troops outside to the 5-star army. This allowed the enemy to appear so smoothly in front of him without any worries. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to hold on for so long wasn't because of how powerful their cavalry was or how powerful they were. To put it bluntly, they were using the terrain to cut off the 5-star army supply route. Although Resin City had prepared a lot of military rations like instant noodles, compressed biscuits, ham sausages, and canned meat. However, there was still a limit to their numbers. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were expending a huge amount every day. Therefore, the food that was convenient and could fill their stomachs was basically given to the main forces of the 5-star army. The surrendered Russian and Mongolian divisions did not receive such treatment. In the end, they still had to rely on normal rations to maintain their daily needs. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't have to spend so much effort to attack the Timur Empire. And now, after the only drawback was taken care of by the five-star army, they could finally appear in front of Khan Amur without any worries. Having figured everything out, Ur's face turned red with anger. Search. Even if we have to turn the entire city upside down, we have to find Mandu Latu for this Khan. We have to tear him into pieces. Tear him into pieces. Yes. Seeing that the Khan was enraged, his subordinates didn't dare to dissuade him and quickly agreed. Then the 50,000 cavalrymen in the city began to move. They searched every possible corner of the great general's whereabouts. But unfortunately, they still couldn't find any traces of him. When the situation was reported to Khan Amur, someone suggested, "Great Khan, there are still some nobles' houses that haven't been searched yet. For example, Odin Gerald and the others. Enough. The enemy is before us. Let's deal with the current situation first." Khan Amur raised his right hand and waved it gently. Now was the time to unite against the enemy. There was no need to make the city restless. Although he didn't like Odin Gerald and the others, they weren't weak. The people who were related to them could be said to be deeply rooted. If they were to search his house at this time, it would only cause panic. Khan Amur believed that he still cared about the overall situation. However, what he didn't know was that Mandu Ratu was currently hiding in Odin Gerald's house and drinking with him. What he didn't know was that Odin Gerald's hatred for him had reached the point where he would rather see the entire Timur Empire be destroyed than to teach Amur a lesson. It could be said that this kind of hatred had been engraved into his bones. It was greater than the sky. Odin Gerald's mansion was already filled with many mansion soldiers. They were the armed forces of the shaman family. Usually, they were hidden and not known by others. However, now that they had reached a critical juncture, they were gathered in the mansion. Their purpose was to prevent Amur from acting recklessly and attacking them before he died. This way, they would have a certain degree of resistance. Actually, it wasn't only Odin Gerald's mansion. The houses of the nobles in the vicinity were also like this. They either activated their hidden forces or spent a large amount of money to hire many guards. In short, they all possessed a certain degree of defensive power. In order to save their lives, they also agreed that once Amur lost his mind and wanted to attack them, they would send reinforcements from all sides. Only in this way could they ensure their own safety. "Come, great general, please drink." Although the city outside was surrounded, there was no panic on Odin Gerald's face at this moment. On the contrary, he was still as calm as water. "Sigh, I'm no longer a great general. There's no need to call me that in the future. I'm just an ordinary person." Mandu Ratu had a cautious look on his face. Obviously, the whole city was searching for him now. It was impossible to say that he wasn't flustered at all. Good. Odin Gerald didn't intend to force him. He poured wine for both sides with a smile on his face, then asked, "Brother Ratu, do you think he will act recklessly?" It shouldn't be. The five-star army is outside the city. He can't even deal with them. How can he come to find trouble with us?" Knowing what the other party wanted to hear, Mandu Ratu said according to his thoughts. "That's true." Hearing this, Odin Gerald nodded in agreement. He reached out his hand to take the wine glass, but before he put the wine to his lips, he asked again, "Brother Ratu, he won't go crazy, right?" "You should know that a crazy person can do anything." "No, our great Khan is very wise. He won't go crazy easily," Mandu Ratu said again with certainty. Finally, Odin Gerald didn't stop asking. Instead, he lightly nodded and said with a smile, Good. Come, let's continue drinking." Mandu Ratu's guess was right. Perhaps he understood their great Khan well enough. Amur was indeed not a crazy person. Until now, he was still very rational. Even when he saw the cannons of the five-star army appearing outside the city from the top of the city tower, he didn't have the intention to kill people in the city. Instead, he called the captain of the guards and gave him an order. He knew that he couldn't defeat the five-star army, Now that he was surrounded, the only way was to escape. The reason why he didn't make a move on the nobles in the city was because he couldn't spare any energy. Compared to killing others, his own life was more important. The 50,000 cavalrymen in the city were all recruited by him. Among them, the high-ranking officers were all appointed by him. They only listened to him. This was also the reason why Mandu Ratu hid, even though he was a great general. He couldn't command these 50,000 cavalrymen at all. This was Amur's final trump card. Now he had to use this trump card to escape. He firmly believed in a phrase that the Han people often said, "Where there's life, there's hope." Although he didn't know if he could escape this time, and if there was a possibility of Dongshan rising again after escaping, he had to try. Otherwise, if he stayed in the city, even if the King Wunan of Damyang didn't kill him, he was no different from being dead. The 5-star army was still surrounding Herat. Because there were many mountains and lakes and the terrain was complicated, many routes that seemed to be close had to be taken around. This greatly slowed down the assembly of the army. According to the reported itinerary of the various troops, it would take another 5 to 7 days to complete the encirclement. Before the encirclement was complete, Yang Qindong didn't prepare to launch an attack. He wanted to finish it in one strike. Seeing that Herat was going to be his, he wanted to reduce the losses as much as possible. This was also beneficial for the post-war reconstruction. Therefore, whether it was the Air Force or the cannons, they weren't arranged to be deployed immediately. The 5-star army didn't have any plans to make a move, but an accident happened. That night, the 4 gates of Herat city opened wide. Following that, an endless stream of cavalrymen began to charge out. At first, Yang Qindong thought that the enemy was testing the waters. However, as more and more cavalrymen charged out of the city, he and the other generals finally realized that this wasn't a test. They were clearly trying to break out of the encirclement. Break out of the encirclement? It seems that this Amur still cherishes his life. Yang Qindong, who had heard the news, looked at the sand table in front of him in the main tent. "Young master, we don't have enough troops and aren't prepared enough. I'm afraid we can't kill all of the enemy cavalry." Beta Persei had already put on a suit of armor and appeared in front of Yang Qindong. Although he said that they couldn't, his restless appearance proved that he wanted to attack and beat the enemy while they were down. "Yes, our encirclement hasn't been fully launched yet. I have to say that this Amur chose the right time. Haha, forget it. The entire Timur Empire is gone. Even if this great Khan escapes, what can he do?" Yang Qindong quickly adjusted his attitude. In history, he had never heard of this Amur's name, completely unlike Ivan, who had a resounding reputation. Even so, this person's strength must be ordinary. If that was the case, then so be it. If he wanted to escape, then so be it. As long as he dares to continue to be the enemy of the 5-star army, then one day he will be discovered and beheaded on horseback. Thank you to 3-inch Flame for your monthly votes for munitions. Longzi thanks you. Munitions will be finished next month. I guarantee that it will be finished at least 3 to 4 chapters a day. Please read it without worry. The new book, Duke Ferocious, will be officially published on the novel website today. Everyone is welcome to read it. At the same time, please bookmark, recommend, and click the new book. Your support is the greatest encouragement to the prodigal son. Chapter 1534. After making the decision to give up, the requirements were lowered. Naturally, there was no burden in fighting. Looking at the eager Beta Persei, he said, "Go, kill as many enemies as you can. It doesn't matter if you can capture Amur or not. Do your best to severely injure the enemy's strength, understand?" Understood. Beta Persei's eyes were immediately filled with fighting spirit. He smiled and agreed, then turned around and left. Not only Beta Persei, but the 5-star army that had arrived outside the city earlier also sent out troops. They chased after the enemy with the goal of severely injuring the enemy's strength. Facing the 5-star army coming from all directions, Timur's cavalry didn't have the slightest intention of fighting. Like a lizard that had its tail cut off, those that were surrounded surrendered one after another, while those that weren't surrounded fled for their lives. Amur's luck wasn't bad. Under the protection of the palace guards, he, who was wearing an ordinary military uniform, fled with the army. 50,000 cavalry, this was the last force. After paying the price of 20,000 people, Amur fled. It wasn't until 2 years later that he was captured by Bai Shuang, the commander of the Yi army. With Amur's escape, 50,000 cavalry came out of the city. In the entire Herat city, it became an undefended city. At daybreak, the 5-star army smoothly entered the city, and they were welcomed by Odundril and the other nobles. As for Mandu Latu, he had no intention of joining the 5-star army. He became an ordinary person and was eventually sent to other provinces to live out his remaining years in a foreign land. With the fall of Herat city, it also heralded the fall of the once glorious and powerful Timur Empire. After staying in the city for only 5 days, Yang Qindong waited for the other armies to gather in the city. After some inquiries and investigations, Yang Qindong summoned his favorite student, Bai Shuang, and handed over this vast territory to him. Logically speaking, Bai Shuang's time in the army was rather short. At the very least, compared to the new army's commander Su He and the world's first cavalry army's commander Tian, who he was slightly inferior. However, these people did not want to stay in one place. Instead, they wanted to follow Yang Qindong and display their skills on the battlefield. In the end, White Shuang took on this heavy responsibility. Yang Qindong was very optimistic about this disciple of his. Not only was he talented in both civil and martial arts, but he was also very young and very loyal. With such a person entrusted with such an important task, he was at ease. In the end, the Yi Army Corps and Central Asia were established. The position of provincial governor and army commander naturally belonged to Bai Shuang. Under his command were the first army of the different race, 50,000 men, the second army of the different race, 50,000 men, the second army of the different race, 50,000 men, the first army of the Ming, 40,000 men, the fourth army of the Ming, 40,000 men, the fifth army of the Ming, 40,000 men, the fourth army of the Ming, 40,000 men, the fifth army of the Ming, 40,000 men. He was in charge of the security and construction of this Khanate region. From a regiment commander who led 2,000 people to the current Yi Army Corps commander who led 200,000 people, Bai Shuang could be said to have walked to the peak of his life. In the face of Yang Qindong's trust, he could only pat his chest and promise that he would reintegrate this area as soon as possible. While moving the population out, he would also move the population in from other areas to achieve the goal of completely erasing the original history. Bai Shuang's thoughts satisfied Yang Qindong. This was exactly what he wanted. He also said that if he needed anything, he could send a telegram at any time. Regardless of whether it was Crimson City or the army, they would do their best to help. Having arranged all this, in the 5th month of 1465, Yang Qindong took his main army, including the 1st World Cavalry Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 4th Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the Mabe Division, the 1st Cold Front Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 1st Cold Front Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the Mabe Division, the 1st Cold Front Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the Mabe Division, the 1st Cold Front Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, and the 3rd Cold Front Division. Seeing Yang Qindong leave with his army, Bai Shuang returned to the army headquarters and summoned the high-ranking officers of the division level and above to discuss how to completely resolve the situation in Central Asia. The first was to send troops to the Crimean Khanate, the only Khanate in the region that still had some influence and had not been affected by the war. Bai Shuang wanted to make this part of Yang Xie's territory. Yang Qindong had already put these matters to the back of his mind. Since he had given everything to Bai Shuang, he had to fully trust him. Right now, what he needed to do was take care of those people who dared to take advantage of the chaos to ambush him. And before that, he still needed to take care of one more matter: Yusang. Yusang, in modern-day Tibet, had been established by the Yuan dynasty. In the Ming dynasty, it was known as the Yusang Guard, but in reality, it had never truly been ruled by the Great Ming. During the reign of Zhu Yuanzhang, the Ming dynasty had established a certain relationship with Tibet, but this relationship was completely different from what many people had imagined. At the time, Tibet had already been divided into many monasteries and factions, with no single faction holding the dominant position. Although the historical records of the Ming dynasty claimed that Emperor Hongwu had established the Yusang Prefect, Duogan Prefect, and other military and political organizations in Tibet, in reality, this relationship could not even be considered a bond. It was more like a unilateral declaration of the Ming dynasty. This was because the Tibetan leaders who acknowledged this relationship did not have the authority to govern Tibet, and they could not even be considered a mainstream faction. Thus, on the issue of territory, one could not just rule as they wished. At the very least, one had to consider the feelings and attitudes of others. If those who truly had the right to speak did not know or acknowledge the rule of others, what meaning was there in marking out a few administrative regions on the map? It was precisely this sort of place that, after the appearance of the little butterfly Yang Qindong, had completely broken off relations with the Great Ming. Not only that, it had even joined in with the other Khaganate factions to deal with Yang Qindong. Now that the matter with the Khaganates had been resolved, it was naturally time to look for trouble. As long as others did not offend him, he would punish them. How could Yang Qindong allow others to strike him and not retaliate? The new 5 armies had already received the order to deal with Yusang and liberate it, and they had already set off for that place. Now, all that was needed was for the main force of the army to gather them. Once Yusang was pacified, Yang Qindong would move against the Sudan and Bangla. He would not let go of any of these petty people who had set their sights on him. The new 5 armies. In the headquarters, Army Commander Sherwanshan was currently listening to the report of his subordinate, Commander Ancient River, from the 1st Cavalry Division. Ancient River gloomily said, "Military Commander, our division has advanced 200 some li, but we still haven't seen the main force of Yusang. Along the way, we've asked the locals, and according to what they said, their main force retreated half a month ago. As for where they went, no one knows." He had originally believed that by seizing the position of vanguard, he would be able to make a name for himself. But contrary to his expectations, he hadn't even seen a shadow of the enemy. This truly left him depressed. No one knows. A hint of concern appeared in Sherwanshan's eyes when he heard this report, but he quickly turned to Infantry Division Commander Ning Wenfeng and asked, "What does Commander Ning think?" After defecting to the 5-star army, this Iron Triangle had finally reunited. Although there was a difference in their military positions, Sherwanshan was still willing to listen to the opinions of these 2 brothers under his long-term habit. As the most intelligent of the 3, Ning Wenfeng was the one who considered matters more thoroughly. When he heard Gu Heji's words earlier, he had already thought of some things. Now that he was being asked, he voiced out the doubts in his heart. "Military Commander, according to what Teacher Gu said, I think that these people didn't escape but hid. They're like a venomous snake hiding in a dark corner, ready to open its venomous fangs and bite us at any time. Give me the details." Ning Wenfeng's analysis coincided with his own, so Sherwanshan asked with an encouraging look. "Yes." After agreeing, Ning Wenfeng continued, "The information sent by the Intelligence Department says that Yusang was divided into 3 parts. Front Tibet included modern-day Lhasa and the Shannon region. Rear Tibet included modern-day Kaze, and Ngari included the entire northern Tibetan plateau, modern-day Ngari, and part of the Naka region. These three parts are like the current Baiming of the south, none of them willing to submit to the other. But ever since that Yang Silu appeared, he actually borrowed soldiers from the Sudan to deal with the other two parts. Now that he's divided into three parts, he's unified, and he even dares to set his sights on our Yangtze. And this sort of person is brimming with ambition. Even before the battle has begun, he's already retreating. This doesn't fit his personality. Not bad. Sherwan Shan nodded in praise. Continue. Military commander, this subordinate believes that they've only disappeared because they're waiting for an opportunity. Once the opportunity is ripe, they'll definitely jump out and take a bite. Thus, if we want to fight a decisive battle with them, we must first throw out bait. Ning Wenfeng immediately threw out his own point of view, and a plan to lure the enemy came out from his mouth. From Saker to the town of Rito, Sherwan Shan had followed Ning Wenfeng's instructions and thrown out bait several times, but he still hadn't seen any sign of the enemy. In the end, after traveling 800 li, the army was forced to stop in the vicinity of Sitazang. Altitude sickness had begun to appear in the army, and 30% of the soldiers had already lost the ability to fight due to the lack of oxygen. The rest of the soldiers also showed signs of loss of appetite. This was the frightening aspect of the Yusang region. Very few people who weren't natives of the region could endure this climate without experiencing any changes to their bodies. Looking at the soldiers in the army who were either vomiting incessantly, pale and unsightly, or listless and weak, Sherwan Shan, as the commander of the army, became anxious. When they were still 30 li from Sitazang, the new 5 armies stopped. Order the army to stop. The various divisions began to gather around the headquarters, and as they were doing this, Auxiliary Bishop Wang Dalian was leading 20,000 Tibetan soldiers to surround them. Great understanding of military supplies will be finished next month. I guarantee that it will be finished at least 3 or 4 chapters a day, so please feel at ease and read it. The new book, The Duke's Ferocity, will be published today on the novel website, and everyone is welcome to read it. At the same time, please bookmark, recommend, and click this new book. Your every support is the greatest encouragement to the prodigal son. Chapter 1535. What a pity! Seeing the 5 astral corps suddenly stop advancing, Dalian, who was hiding in the shadows, shook his head regretfully. Send someone to keep a close eye on them. As long as they dare to advance, find an opportunity to eat them up. As the assistant king and the lord of this land, although Dalian only had 10,000 soldiers, and 5,000 of them were newly assembled, he was still filled with confidence after seeing the performance of the 5-star army. Altitude sickness could instantly turn a strong man into a weak child. He was just waiting for the 5-star army to weaken so that he could strike with all his might. Unfortunately, the other party seemed to have noticed something and stopped advancing. While he felt that it was a pity, he ordered his subordinate, Shaili, to keep a close eye on the other party and wait for an opportunity to appear. Speaking of which, Yusang's army was mainly made up of monks, and the outside world called them monk soldiers. Those who led the army were not called generals, but monks. Shaili was the monk that Assistant King Dalian valued the most, and he was in charge of the monk soldiers. Seeing the 5-star army suddenly stop advancing, Shaili was puzzled. Unlike the Assistant King's calm personality, Shaili wanted to take the initiative to attack and destroy the Han army. At the very least, he wanted to deal a heavy blow to the enemy and let the Han know the strength of the monk soldiers. Even though the new 5th Division had 40,000 soldiers, and he only had half of that number, Shaili was still fearless. In his view, a Han army that could not adapt to the climate was just a paper tiger, not something to be afraid of. After hesitating for a long time, Shaili made the decision to take the initiative. Make preparations. Tonight, we will try to launch an attack. Let's probe the situation of the 5-star army. At this moment, in the headquarters of the new 5th Division, Commander Sherwan Shan did not know that he had already become the prey in the eyes of some people. The reason he ordered the army to stop was not because he had noticed anything, but because of the altitude sickness. When he saw that the fighting strength of the army was constantly being depleted, he began to panic. In this state, how could they set a trap for the enemy? It was already difficult for them to even protect themselves. It was precisely because he sympathized with the soldiers below that they were able to escape a calamity. Otherwise, once they had entered the enemy's ambush, it would really be difficult to return. Within the military headquarters, Cavalry Division Commander Ning Wenfeng had a look of self-reflection on his face. "Commander, this is all my fault. I originally thought that by letting the 1st Cavalry Division take the lead and penetrate deep into the enemy's territory alone, the enemy would definitely find an opportunity to discover us. Then we would be able to launch a counterattack and inflict heavy losses on them. But from the looks of it, these Tibetan soldiers are much calmer than we expected. On the contrary, our army has lost a lot of combat power due to altitude sickness." Seeing Ning Wenfeng lower his head and admit his mistake, Sherwan Shan shook his head and said, "Commander Ning, don't blame yourself. This matter has nothing to do with you. The altitude sickness is so strong that it completely exceeds our imagination. This is the reason why the soldiers are unable to adapt to the altitude sickness. As for the matter of luring the enemy, let's talk about it later. Right now, we should first think about how to solve the soldiers' physical condition and let them recover their combat power." The altitude sickness being so strong was also beyond Sherwan Shan's expectations. It was also because of his unusual experience since childhood. As a bandit, after joining the army, he had traveled to all sorts of places. These experiences allowed him to quickly adapt to various climates and didn't cause too much of a reaction. Didn't you see that even the 1st Cavalry Division's Commander Guhi, who usually looked like a strong and sturdy man, was currently vomiting and having diarrhea in his tent, losing half his life? If even the general was like this, one could imagine how the ordinary soldiers below would react. Under the current situation, it would be better if they didn't encounter the enemy. Once they did, who knew what would happen? At the thought of the possible problems they might encounter, Sherwan Shan's expression became very unsightly. "Commander Ning, now is not the time to think about luring the enemy. Instead, we should think about how to protect ourselves first. How about this? You go to the army and count how many soldiers are still able to fight. Then you can organize them into groups and command them. You'll be responsible for guarding the tent first. I'll also immediately report the situation here to the 6th young master and ask him to send reinforcements as soon as possible." It had to be said that as a senior officer in the army, Sherwan Shan was very qualified. At least he knew how to judge the situation and not blindly act recklessly. If it was a fierce general who only knew how to fight and kill, he probably wouldn't even consider these things. After receiving the military order, Ning Wenfeng went to make preparations. Looking at his departing figure, Sherwan Shan couldn't help but rejoice that he still had a commander under him who didn't have altitude sickness. Otherwise, he would really fall into a situation where he didn't have a general to rely on. Altitude sickness was a pathological reaction that occurred after the human body entered a high altitude and was exposed to a low pressure and low oxygen environment. For example, when an outsider first came into contact with this kind of climate, they would feel all sorts of discomfort. Unless they lived here for a long time and got used to it, their condition would become much better. Of course, this didn't exclude people like Sherwan Shan and Ning Wenfeng, who naturally didn't have such a strong reaction. While Ning Wenfeng went to the army to investigate, Sherwan Shan didn't remain idle. He used the radio station to report the situation to Yang Qindong. At this time, our Bugnam of Gojoseon has already led his army to the edge of Ili and is preparing to enter the Yusang region. After reading this telegram, Yang Qindong's expression turned extremely grave. As someone who came later, he naturally understood what altitude sickness was. A large part of the reason why Tibet was so sparsely populated was because of this altitude sickness. In his eyes, the Tibetan soldiers and monk soldiers of the Yusang region weren't frightening. What was frightening was that the natural climate made it impossible for an army to display its normal fighting ability. This made the enemy's strength even more apparent. The best way to deal with altitude sickness was to rest more and exercise less. When necessary, one could rely on oxygen to alleviate the discomfort. But right now, he didn't have any oxygen. Even though he knew how to alleviate the discomfort, he was still somewhat at a loss. After pacing back and forth for a long time, Yang Qindong raised his head once more, his eyes brimming with resolve and determination. Send a message to Commander Shi Wanshan. Have him rest where he is. Until the soldiers of the army recover, they are not allowed to advance. Tell him that this king will send someone to escort the provisions and guarantee that there won't be any problems with their provisions. Also, order the other armies to speed up their march. Once they enter the Yusang region, they are to immediately find encampments to rest and reorganize. In addition, find some young commoners in the vicinity to form another plateau army. Quickly go and handle this matter. After waving his hand at Chief Wangshan, who was waiting for a reply, Yang Qindong, who had just issued a string of orders, felt his confidence return to his body. Shi Wanshan had sized up the situation. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, he had decided to stop advancing. This was undoubtedly the correct decision. With this firm attitude, he no longer demanded that the other side continue to advance. He only needed to maintain the current situation and exert some pressure on the Yusang region. At the very least, he would send an army to the Yusang region. He wanted to see how many soldiers were unable to adapt to the climate. If there were, he would immediately arrange for them to withdraw. To put it bluntly, as long as this sort of altitude sickness was properly treated, it wouldn't take anyone's life. It would just be a matter of some people reacting more strongly, some reacting less strongly, or a very small number of people not reacting at all. He only needed to select those soldiers who didn't react and have them continue to advance. This problem would be resolved. For the sake of safety, Yang Qindong had also decided to send an army to the Yusang region. The local people had probably already adapted to this climate. If he could send them out, the effect would naturally be the best. 3 consecutive orders were issued. As the main force of the army advanced, it also began to busy itself with the recruitment of soldiers. As soon as the 5-star Army's recruitment strategy with its generous pay was announced, a flood of people came to apply. After all, in the Yusang region, where food and clothing were hard to come by, being able to eat and be paid was something that many people could only dream of. Moreover, when the telegram to the new 5-star Army reached Commander Shi Wanshan's hands, he became even more determined to hold the line and wait for reinforcements. He had someone make a copy of the telegram and send it to Division Commander Ning Wenfeng. Then he respectfully waited for reinforcements to arrive. At this moment, on the outskirts of the new 5-star Army camp, Monk Shaley was slowly approaching with 4,000 soldier monks. As a probing attack, although Shaley had made a strong request, Auxiliary Bishop Wang Dalian had still only given him 4,000 soldiers. 2,000 of them were new soldiers that had just been recruited. Although the scouts had reported that the 5-star Army had suddenly stopped advancing because too many people were suffering from altitude sickness. However, how could Dalian know that this wasn't a ploy by the enemy to lure them out? If the enemy didn't react, or if they didn't have such a large reaction, wouldn't he be sending all of his troops into the tiger's den? Out of caution, he only gave Shaley 4,000 soldier monks. In his opinion, this was enough to test the true strength of the 5-star Army. Division Commander Ning Wenfeng didn't know the situation on the outskirts, nor did he understand the surrounding environment. After receiving the orders from the army commander, he only sent out scouts to be in charge of all reconnaissance activities within 5 li of the camp. After all, before they had enough strength, If they discovered that the enemy was further away, they wouldn't be able to chase after them. As such, it was better to gather all of their troops into a fist. At the same time, Ning Wenfeng also investigated the entire new 5-star army. He found 15,000 soldiers who didn't have such a strong reaction and temporarily organized them into a division to be responsible for the safety of the entire new 5-star army. When all of this was done, the sky had already turned completely dark. The camp started to make fires and cook. From afar, it looked quite busy. Chapter 1536. Speaking of which, the risk of altitude sickness taking one's life was very low. As long as one could rest in bed for a while after experiencing the sickness, there was a 90% chance that the sickness would be alleviated. And as long as one stayed in this climate for a long time, they would slowly get used to it, and their bodies would recover their various functions until they were as lively as dragons and as lively as tigers. At present, the soldiers and officers who had experienced the sickness were all resting on their beds, waiting for the day when they could get used to it and recover. The only worry was whether the new 5 armies would be able to last until then, or whether the Tibetan soldiers would give them this opportunity to rest and recuperate. This would test Ning Wenfeng's defensive capabilities. Once an enemy appeared, whether he could beat them back at the first moment would affect the enemy's judgment and prevent them from acting recklessly. Although no one knew if these Tibetan soldiers would attack the new 5 armies, Ning Wenfeng had still thought of several ways to deal with the situation, so it was better to be prepared. In the middle of the night, when this division commander was still unable to sleep due to his heavy heart, a policeman suddenly shouted from outside the tent. "Division commander, the scouts have reported that they've discovered quite a few figures on the perimeter of our camp. They can't tell if it's the enemy or how many people have come. Take a look." By the time the word "take a look" was said, Ning Wenfeng had already walked out of the tent, fully dressed. It was true that he had been lying down, but he had not taken off his outer robe, precisely in case something unexpected happened. It now seemed that the enemy had moved even faster than he had imagined. The telegram requesting reinforcements had just been sent during the day, so reinforcements couldn't have arrived so quickly. Thus, the ones who had come now were definitely the enemy. The thought of the enemy caused Ning Wenfeng's expression to turn rather grim. He knew very well that if he couldn't beat back the first wave of enemies, the new 5 armies would be in real danger once they saw through the true strength of the enemy. Order. All the commanders and soldiers of the provisional division are to move out with this division commander. Ning Wenfeng had decided that he would either not move or use all his strength. In order to not let the other party see through the true strength of the 5 fresh armies, he gave up on the idea of probing the strength of both sides. The moment he made his move, he would send all of his 15,000 soldiers to give the other party the impression that they were powerful. Only in this way could he achieve the goal of effectively shocking the other party. The new 5 armies quickly became lively. The soldiers of the newly formed temporary division looked for their squad leaders. Squad leaders looked for their platoon leaders. Platoon leaders looked for their company commanders, and so on. Very soon, the first temporary regiment was assembled, followed by the second. All of this was due to the 5-star Army's training program. One of the training programs, the emergency gathering at night, was very useful at this time. All right, the 1st and 2nd regiments will follow me and charge out. The other regimental commanders will follow after the formation. There's no need to wait for orders. Knowing that speed was the most important thing in war, Ning Wenfeng shouted and led 2 regiments, a total of 4,000 soldiers, to charge out of the tent. They didn't even try to defend and chose to attack as well. Although doing this would inevitably cause some losses, in order to not let the other party see through their true strength, Ning Wenfeng had no choice but to do this. The movement in the camp quickly woke up the sleeping Commander Sherwanshan. When he heard from his subordinates that the enemy had come to attack the camp, he was shocked. He didn't think that the enemy would appear so quickly. It seemed that the other party had seen through the fact that the soldiers in the army had altitude sickness. Division Commander Ning sent out all the soldiers without altitude sickness at once. Isn't this too risky? A few division-level officers with ugly expressions and weak bodies walked out of their tents and came in front of Shi Wanshan. However, at the same time, there were people who raised different opinions. They believed that for the safety of the camp, they should at least arrange for some people to stay behind. No. Shi Wanshan shook his head and said without any doubt, Commander Ning's method is correct. In order to not let the enemy see through our true strength, the safest method is to go all out in one battle. As for the safety of the camp, with me here, there won't be any problems. After saying this, Shi Wanshan took a 3-meter-long broadsword from a guard and held it in his hand. Then he stood in front of the camp like a door god. It was as if he was a man who could stop 10,000 enemies. Men, bring this division master's spear over as well. Seeing this scene, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ancient River, propped up his sickly body and said to the guards beside him, with Shi Wanshan taking the lead, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ancient River, the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Liu, and the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Meng Chao, all picked up their weapons and stood in front of the camp. Although some of them were still extremely weak, they would still pick up their weapons and fight to the death if an enemy came to kill them at this time. This kind of stance of wanting to fight to the death influenced more people. Gradually, more and more officers came out of their tents after hearing the news. Finally, many soldiers also walked out of their tents with their sickly bodies, looking as if they were facing death with equanimity. As for Ning Wenfeng, he led 15,000 warriors and rushed out of the tent one after another, fighting with the monk soldiers who were coming at them. In the darkness, Monk Sha Li also couldn't see how many soldiers came from the 5-star army, so he didn't retreat immediately. Instead, he ordered the army to meet them head-on. Since this was a test, how could they know the strength of the other party without fighting? But when he made his move, Monk Sha Li still had an idea. He arranged for people to take a detour to the 5-star army's camp to see what was going on there. He had a feeling that the other party had sent out all the soldiers they could. If this was really the case, the 5-star army's camp would definitely be quiet, and he would have achieved the result of probing the other party's strength. Ning Wenfeng, who led the army to charge, was overjoyed when he saw that the monk soldiers didn't retreat after seeing him and instead charged towards him. What he was most worried about was that the other party would retreat. If that was the case, he didn't dare to guarantee that it was the right decision to send people to chase after them. Most importantly, he was worried that under such intense movement, the soldiers' bodies wouldn't be able to withstand it. Would there be a lack of oxygen? If the other party really retreated, he would be in a dilemma. Now that the enemy wasn't retreating, it gave him a good opportunity to annihilate them. In order to show the strength of the 5-star army, he had to grab this opportunity. Come on, let's outflank them. We can't let the enemy escape. Ning Wenfeng laughed heartily as he ordered the 5-star army behind him to surround the monk soldiers. Relying on their advantage in numbers, they quickly surrounded the monk soldiers. Sha Li was careful and didn't charge forward with all 4,000 soldiers. Instead, he left behind 1,000 veterans, so that if there was a chance, he would kill his way into the 5-star army's camp and wreak havoc. And it was this action that saved his life. When he saw that the number of 5-star soldiers was increasing in the darkness, and they had already outnumbered them by 4 to 5 times, his expression became extremely ugly. Why are there so many 5-star army soldiers unharmed? Are they not afraid of altitude sickness? Or did they send out all the people they can? Or is this a trap to lure me into sending out troops? Sha Li was filled with doubts. He decided to send out scouts to report back to the 5-star army's camp before making a decision. During this time, he could only watch as the 3,000 soldiers he sent out were surrounded and slaughtered by the 5-star army. The 5-star army's numbers were too many. It was so many that even if Shah Li brought out 1,000 Tibetan soldiers, monk soldiers, they wouldn't be able to solve the problem. He could only hope that the Five-Star Army's camp would be empty. After a huge battle, the Five-Star Army soldiers could be said to have killed to their heart's content. Out of the 3,000 Tibetan soldiers that were surrounded, 2,000 of them were new soldiers. They had never seen such a battle formation before. Being surrounded by so many people already made their hearts flustered. The enemy's numbers were also several times their own. When they fought, there would be several weapons aimed at them at the same time. It was truly impossible to guard against. The battle ended without any suspense. In just an hour, the 3,000 Tibetan soldiers were completely wiped out. During this time, under the command of Division Commander Ning Wenfeng, they didn't even take a single enemy captive. In a situation where their own strength was somewhat weak, keeping captives would only attract unnecessary trouble. Shah Li had already retreated halfway through the battle. The scouts he sent out had already sent back news. Outside the camp of the Five-Star Army, the scouts saw countless soldiers of the Five-Star Army standing there in a line. It was a huge crowd, and there was no end to it. This discovery frightened the scout, and he hurriedly reported back. When Shah Li heard the news, he was also shocked. He immediately turned around and left without caring about the soldiers that were being killed. This time, the probing ended in a huge defeat. After Ning Wenfeng won this battle, he ordered the soldiers to chop off the heads of the Tibetan soldiers. He wanted to build a capital to intimidate the enemy. When he finished cleaning up the battlefield and returned to the camp, he saw Division Commander Shi Wanshan leading a group of people to guard the entrance of the camp. The smart Ning Wenfeng quickly understood what had happened. He hurriedly took large strides forward and half knelt in front of Shi Wanshan to beg for forgiveness. Division Commander, it is this subordinate's negligence. I sent out all the soldiers and didn't leave anyone behind to guard the camp. Please punish me. Shi Wanshan reached out and helped Ning Wenfeng up. He said in a powerful voice, Division Commander Ning is innocent but meritorious. Your actions were correct. This was clearly the enemy's probing. If we couldn't beat them in one go, there would be endless trouble in the future. Well done. Military supply to Ming will be finished next month. I guarantee that it will be finished at least 3 or 4 chapters a day. Please feel free to read it. The new book, Duke Fierce, will be officially released on the novel website today. Everyone is welcome to read it. At the same time, please bookmark, recommend, and click on the new book. Your support is the greatest encouragement to the prodigal son. Chapter 1537. This was because Ning Wenfeng's all-in gamble had indeed had the effect of intimidating the opponent. When Shaili reported the situation to Assistant Dean Darien, he learned that the 3,000 skulls had appeared outside the camp of the new 5 armies. As expected, the Tibetan soldiers became well-behaved, giving the new 5 armies enough time to wait for reinforcements to arrive. This probing had scared Dalian out of his wits, and in the blink of an eye, a month had passed in this standoff. In this month, Yang Qindong had led his army into the Yusang region and had set up camp on the border. Every day, soldiers who were unwell would appear, and when they were discovered, they would be immediately carried out of the Yusang region. In this month, nearly 200,000 soldiers had been carried out in batches, leaving less than 100,000 soldiers in the camp. After all this time, there was still no sign of anyone suffering from altitude sickness. Yang Qindong knew that these people had already adapted to the environment and climate, and that they had the ability to fight against the Tibetan army here. What was worth mentioning was that of the less than 100,000 soldiers left, the main force was the Mongolian and foreign divisions. This was especially true for the First Army of Russia. Of the 50,000 soldiers, less than 1,000 had suffered from altitude sickness and had been carried out because they were unwell. Perhaps this was because the climate of the Ross Dukedom was similar to that of Yusang. But regardless, this was a good thing. Yang Qindong immediately summoned the commander of the First Army of Russia, Ahuli, and the commander of the Mongolian Second Army, Erhi, and entrusted them with the mission of reinforcing the new 5 armies and capturing the Yusang region. Along with them were the nearly 10,000 newly recruited soldiers from the Ili region. Their appearance just so happened to fill the gap between the 2 divisions, filling them to the brim. Both Ahuli and Erhi were deeply moved that Yang Qindong had given such an important mission to these surrendered generals. Just this trust alone made them determined to do their best. At the same time, this was a good chance for them to perform and render meritorious service. With Yang Qindong's orders and trust, the Russian 1st Division and the Mongolian 2nd Division set off into the depths of Yusang. Yang Qindong turned around and led his army out of the Yusang region. Their destination was the Timur Empire, where they were prepared to advance on the Delhi Sultanate. After leaving the Yusang region, the soldiers quickly began to recover. By the time they reached Srinagar of the Chagatai Khaganate, the morale of the army had returned to normal. Half a year ago, the Chagatai Khaganate had been destroyed by the 5-star army, and it was now in a period of reconstruction. When Yang Qindong had stationed his troops in the Yusang region, he had sent a telegram to the new army corps in the first city to prepare enough provisions and transport them here. Here, Yumian had to be emphasized. Previously, Yumian had strongly disapproved of occupying the Far East and using it as a springboard to enter the Golden Horde and the Ross Duchy. Because of this, when the far eastern province was attacked, the new army that was supposed to arrive as quickly as possible was slow to arrive and did not arrive. In the end, it was only after Yang Qindong had personally left Psuxian City and arrived at the first city that Yumian reluctantly agreed to this war. In order to truly convince him, Yang Qindong had even made a 3-year bet with him. The general idea was that the expenditure of the war could not compare to the gains of the war. Yumian, who had studied the teachings of Confucius and Mencius from a young age, had always believed that only the great Ming was a superior country and that all other places were barbarians and desolate lands, had gladly accepted the bet. In his eyes, besides the great Ming, all other places were poor lands. Even if they occupied those places and won the war, their gains would be limited. Otherwise, there would be no such thing as a militaristic war. However, the outcome of the war was so unexpected that even Yang Qindong himself did not expect that after destroying the Golden Horde and the Ross Duchy, the gains would be as much as 500 to 600 million silver taels. When he received this news, Yumian knew that he had lost and was sincerely convinced of his loss. Whenever Yang Qindong wanted to expand his territory, he would raise both hands in agreement. This time, after receiving Yang Qindong's order, Yumian, Tiger's Mane, and Yangtze made sufficient preparations. Other than leaving behind the necessary rations in the first city, the rest of the people were transported to Srinagar city to prove their determination to support this war. Not only that, they also sent a report to ask for instructions. If necessary, the new regiment could also send troops to participate. Yang Qindong was naturally happy to see the change in Yumian and the others' thinking. He needed provisions. The provisions brought by the army were given to the 1st Division of the Russian army and the 2nd Division of the Mongolian army. Now that the army was short of provisions, there was no need for reinforcements. He still had more than 200,000 people, which was enough to deal with the following situation. Just like this, when Yang Qindong brought the main army to Srinagar city, the city was already filled with provisions and was personally guarded by the 2nd Division of the Mongolian army. The commander of the 2nd Division of the Mongolian army, Nyo Duo, was also a Tiger general. He was arranged to be in charge of patrolling the area from the beginning to the end. This time, when he heard that the 6th Young Master's army needed provisions for the East expedition, he personally led the 305th and 306th regiments to Srinagar city. He wanted to see if there was an opportunity to follow Yang Qindong to the front line. In Srinagar city, when the main force of the 5-star army arrived, they saw Neo Duo and his men waiting at the city gate. Not only that, they had also prepared a hot meal and were waiting for the army to arrive to eat. Subordinate greets the sixth young master. When they saw Yang Qindong appear in front of the city gate on his white dragon under the protection of the black cavalry, Neo Duo brought his 2 division commanders, Chu Duo and Mo Benyi, to kneel on the ground to greet him. Rise. When he saw Neo Duo, Yang Qindong's face was full of smiles. Even though he was the commander of the 2nd Division of the Mongolian army, he was a Han Chinese. Thank you, 6th young master. Neo Duo responded and then raised his head. His face was full of excitement. In the entire 5-star army, Yang Qindong was like a god. It could be said that wherever he appeared, he had never lost a battle. Wherever he pointed his sword, it would not take long before that place became one of Yang Xie's new areas of influence. Since ancient times, there had never been a true Han that could achieve such a feat to be able to open up such a vast territory, to the point that when other races heard the name of Han, they could not help but reveal looks of reverence or tremble in fear. But Yang Qindong did it. He made the Han Chinese the most supreme race in the entire Asia region. Looking at the current situation, the status of the Han Chinese would spread to Europe, Africa, and even further. Just based on this, he should be respected by all the Han Chinese. When Yang Qindong saw the burning look in Neo Duo's eyes, he naturally knew what was going on. However, he was not arrogant. His goal was not achieved yet. He still needed to work hard. It was far from the time to relax and celebrate his victory. Commander Neo, thank you for your hard work. Yang Qindong said with a smile. 6th young master, thank you for your hard work. The food has been prepared and the rations have been sent over. It is enough to feed the 200,000 soldiers for at least a year. Neo Duo took this opportunity to report the completion of his mission. Good, let's enter the city. Yang Qindong chuckled as he exerted force with his legs. Immediately, the white dragon slowly moved forward and went straight into Srinagar city. Srinagar city was just beside the Indus River. At the same time, it was not far from the border of the Hadri Sufan Empire. It was an underground border city. According to Commander Neo Duo's report, when the 5-star army's main force on the Eastern Front forced King Borid to surrender, Er's army was ordered to launch an operation to destroy the Chagatai Khanate. When they reached Srinagar, the Delhi Sultanate almost sent out troops to help. If it weren't for the fact that Er's army was fast enough and didn't give them a chance, the 2 sides would have fought. This Delhi Sultanate is quite bold, ha! Yang Qindong's eyes revealed a trace of disdain when he heard that the other party actually took the initiative to start a war with the 5-star army. Compared to the Yang Xie, who controlled a large amount of territory, the Delhi Sultanate was just a small country. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small country. With such strength, they actually took the initiative to provoke the 5-star army. It was no wonder that Yang Qindong was so angry. That's right, such a small place actually dares to challenge the authority of our 5-star army. They are really courting death. The hot-tempered beta, Persei, snorted coldly. He was a man with a strong sense of nationality. In his eyes, the world should be ruled by the Han people who had the longest history. As for the other small countries, it was wise for them to submit. Otherwise, they would be wiped out one by one. Looking at Beta Persei's look of disdain, Neo Duo smiled bitterly and said, Brother, Beta Persei, things are not that simple. The reason why the Delhi Sultanate is so bold is entirely because they have India behind them. Because our navy captured the ports of Kaji, Giri, and Sri Lanka, causing great pressure on their southern waters. India actually has the strength, but they are too weak in the sea. They can't do anything to our navy, so they want to find trouble with us on land. This time, the Delhi Suhi state and Bangla state sent troops to our Yang Xie's Burma province. They are secretly supporting them. From Neo Duo's report, Beta Persei finally knew the whole story. Thinking that the young master once said that India was a strong country on land, with an army of more than 500,000 people. He couldn't help but stretch out his tongue. If that's the case, they can barely be regarded as an opponent. Chapter 1538. When Yang Qindong heard the same words, he had a different understanding. Wait, Commander Niu, what did you just say? Did you say that India is secretly supporting the Delhi Sultanate and Bangla? Yes. Niu Duo didn't understand what Yang Qindong meant and nodded. Oh, if it's just secretly, then the other side is still afraid of us. Well, let me think, it should be our navy that made them afraid. Yang Qindong had a confident smile on his face. Someone once asked, in the 15th century, was India stronger than the Ming dynasty? In fact, this question itself was problematic. Whether it was population or territory, the Ming dynasty was completely superior to India. But there were still people who asked this question, which showed that India still had some merits in some aspects. At least it was not a weak existence. Otherwise, there would not be such a problem. It was just that India had a fatal flaw, which made it difficult for them to expand even though they had a large population. That was because they were too poor. The size of their territory was too small compared to the population of tens of millions, and India had not developed naval forces. Although there were already fishing boats in the sea, they were far inferior in terms of scale, size, and function. Without enough naval forces, they could only rely on land. It was no wonder that they were poor. They were poor and unable to expand, which was also the root of their weakness. This was also the main reason why the five-star Army's navy could easily take down some coastal towns in the south, and they did not dare to fight back. As Niu Duo said, they could not do anything to the five-star Army's navy at sea. But with more than 500,000 soldiers, they could compete with the five-star army on land. It was just that India was not sure of winning, so they first instigated the Delhi Sultanate to test the strength of the five-star army. But did they not know the horror of the five-star army's army? Being able to destroy the Golden Horde and the Timur Empire was enough to explain everything. Originally, Yang Qindong wanted to deal with the Delhi Sultanate and Bangla this time to solve the siege of Myanmar. It seemed that he would have to take them down as well. As the largest country in the South Asian subcontinent, once it became one of Yang Xie's territories, the situation in Asia would completely change. After thinking that after taking down India, the whole of Asia would be included in Yang Xie's territory, Yang Qindong's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Niu Duo saw all of this and felt that his chance had come. He immediately knelt down and said, "Six, young master. Niu Duo requests to fight on behalf of Er army." "All right, I got it. You'll be in charge of the food supply first." Yang Qindong looked at Niu Duo and nodded, indicating that he understood this matter. Yang Qindong agreed. Regardless of whether or not Yang Qindong's army would participate in the war, they would still be rewarded after winning the war. Satisfied, Niu Duo retreated. After there was no one else in the tent, Beta Persei asked curiously, "Young master, should we send a message to Shurching and ask them to send 2 more armies?" "Why?" Yang Qindong looked sideways at Beta Persei and said with a confident smile, "We don't need any reinforcements to fight a small India." Yang Qindong did have such confidence, and this confidence came from the Navy. Yesterday, he happened to see a telegram. Long Yuntian's division just happened to be resting near the Indian Ocean, so he could send a telegram to ask them to participate. When the time comes, he would like to see how India will defend under the attack from both sides. Moreover, Yang Qindong now had 2 cold vanguard divisions in his hands. This time, among the provisions that Niu Duo transported, there was a lot of ammunition. With this advantage, it wouldn't take much effort to attack a primitive India other than spending some time. If it weren't for the fact that the goal of destroying India wasn't in the previous battle plan, he wouldn't even need the reinforcements. Yang Qindong's troops rushed to Srinagar with an army of more than 200,000. When the news reached the Delhi Sultanate, it really scared King Bala Lodi. It must be said that Lodi has some ability, otherwise, outsiders wouldn't call the current sultanate the Lodi dynasty. But because of his special geographical location, it is too difficult to really develop and grow. Not to mention other things, neighboring India has been eyeing him covetously, giving people the feeling that if they're not careful, they may be swallowed up. Just like how Lodi can become the king of the Delhi Sultanate, India must first recognize him. For this reason, he has also tried to get rid of the shackles imposed on him. But unfortunately, the territory is too small and the population is too small. It is easier said than done to really develop the Sultanate. Now, not only does India keep an eye on him, the even more powerful five-star army has been summoned, giving Lodi nothing but a headache. Previously, the great Khan of the Timur Empire, Amur, had sent an envoy. The general idea was that as long as Lodi was willing to help Bangla send troops to Yangtze's Myanmar province, once they beat back the five-star army, he would help them become even stronger and break away from the threat of India. It was precisely for this reason that Lodi, after careful consideration, decided to work with Bangla to send troops to Myanmar province. But not long after, the Timur Empire was destroyed. When he heard this news, Lodi was somewhat dumbfounded, and he began to regret his previous decision. Then he received news that the main force of the five-star army was heading straight for Yuseng, allowing him to relax a little. Then he placed his hopes on Yuseng, giving the five-star army a hard time. If that was the case, they probably wouldn't come to deal with him. After all, he had contributed to the unification of Yuseng and had lent troops to them. But he had never expected that in just a little more than a month, the main force of the five-star army would actually arrive at Srinka and appear in front of him. This truly frightened Lodi. He immediately sent someone to India's King Nehru for help and was willing to submit to him. There was nothing he could do. Compared to submitting to India, he could at least keep his title and property, and he could even have a chance to rebel. But putting aside the fact that all his opponents in the five-star army had been wiped out, all the kings had either died in battle or become prisoners. Just thinking about the consequences gave him a headache. After the messengers were sent out, Lodi spent every day in fear and trepidation, but he did not receive any reply from India. He thought that things might be going in the worst direction, and he was afraid that India would not help him this time. At this moment, Lodi couldn't help but curse Nehru. Earlier, when he had sent troops to Myanmar, he had asked to borrow food to test India's attitude. The result was naturally that he had borrowed the food. This made Lodi understand that attacking Myanmar was also something that India wanted to see, which was why he had dared to act. But now, seeing that Yang Chindong had destroyed the Timur Empire and was extending his tentacles, Nehru was terrified and didn't care about him anymore. This was truly turning his back on him. He had thought of the most vicious words in his heart just to curse Nehru. But it was useless. If India didn't act, they wouldn't send troops. Was he supposed to face the main force of the five-star army alone? That was an army of more than 200,000 soldiers, and it was said that they had the best firearms in the world. This kind of opponent made Lodi feel powerless even before the battle. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of surrendering, but after thinking about it for a while, he still suppressed the idea. There were some things that one wouldn't be willing to give up before trying them out. He still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. The five-star army had just fought a bitter battle with the Timur Empire for more than a year. They must be exhausted and their strength greatly reduced. If they were really tired, how could he say that he didn't have a chance? As long as they could fight against the five-star army, he believed that India would definitely send troops if there was a chance. In that case, wouldn't there be a chance to turn things around? Thinking about it, wouldn't it be an honor to be the first country to resist the attack of the five-star army? As for whether this idea was good or not, at this time, Lodi was completely confused by the Battle of Myanmar. This was because in this battle, other than the 7 divisions of the Cold Front sending a regiment to participate in the battle, the rest were third-rate local armies with mediocre combat power. It was precisely because of this that Lodi had the idea that the five-star army was mediocre. If they didn't have the world's most advanced firearms, they wouldn't be that powerful. With the intention of competing with the five-star army, Lodi ordered General Singhal to take 60,000 soldiers and camp in Lahore, west of Delhi, to stop the five-star army from entering the hinterland of the Sudan. Then he sent someone to India to inform them of his military plans. He also sent someone to Bangla to ask for reinforcements. Even if he couldn't send reinforcements, he wanted to see if he could transfer back the 20,000 troops he had sent to Burma. It was just a small sultanate, so having 100,000 soldiers was actually not a small number. Previously, he had sent 20,000 soldiers to Myanmar with the Bangla army, so there were only 80,000 soldiers left in the country. After giving General Singhal 60,000 soldiers, there were only 20,000 soldiers left in the country, which was close to emptying out all of his assets. It had to be said that it was a mistake to place all of his hopes on the five-star army's expedition without being able to display their full strength. No matter how tired a lion was, it was still a lion. It was far from being provoked by a seemingly healthy sheep. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.